Welcome to AMP Monterey. I have Kylie Batlin today with us, and I have James Burns. And of course, I'm India Weeks. And welcome to Off Topic, where we're going to try to stay on topic. And the topic we're getting off on today is housing.
Yes, it is a journey indeed.
So who here doesn't need a house?
Oh, who needs one? Is it a need? Is it a want? Is it the American dream?
I think
It's a need.
I think housing is an American dream. I think it was the post-World War II American dream that everyone could have a middle-class lifestyle, where you have a home, your kids can go to college, you get taken care of if you're sick, and you don't retire in poverty. And I think that that's what the American dream was. And I think all of those are not on the table anymore.
And being from a different generation than we are, Kylie, what's your perception of the American dream for your generation?
It's kind of wild that I think about my generation, and it's all of the needs, just actually having our needs taken care of. We're in a space where we're highly educated and at the same time incredibly under-resourced. So in terms of striving to go to college and striving to start businesses and wanting to be able to have families and have them supported and have access to medical care, and we keep facing all of these politicized movements that are restricting our ability to move forward and provide a true sense of stability and growth and even community for ourselves. And the rift, I feel, has been growing between what's happening legislatively and then what is happening as far as our actual voices and wants and concerns and where we want this nation to move forward on a political level, on an ecological level, just on a compassion, like community level. I just feel like a lot of us feel very dystopian because we also have access to a level of information that is unprecedented as well, and we are able to track in real time legislative change and history, and we are able to be so fast with our research and our collectivism and our ability to fact check immediately when someone is coming with information that is clearly biased or definitely designed to keep you from expanding and challenging what is already existing. So
I feel like this generation, with the access to the internet and everything all of the time, might be the smartest generation that humanity's ever produced.
I would say so, in that humanity is juggling more thoughts than ever before. I mean, we used to be able to sit on the porch and watch the grass grow, and now we sit on the porch and we scroll. And so it's it's information overload, which is demoralizing if you don't have it organized. But I think that your generation, what you're saying, is so pertinent because it's like the older generations made no room for the younger generations. And I mean, the will to survive as a species is we're supposed to be perpetuating the species. And that means taking care of the young. And the older generations before World War II were always the poorest demographic. And now the older generations are the richest demographic, and there's no money for homes for people who want to start families, people who want to get an education. I mean, in a sense, the GI Bill after World War II was a small inheritance placed in every veteran's pocket. And with that, they were able to pursue the American dream because that's what they had fought for. But now we don't have that. We're not putting an inheritance in everybody's pocket. If you put money in people's pocket, they make their life better. That was the difference between the World War II GI Bill and then the Great Society. The Great Society, again, the war on poverty, was you made everybody go to deal with bureaucracy. They had to deal with somebody to do anything. That was the barrier to them making their lives better.
I love that you brought up the bureaucracy because I am myself coming from a situation where both of my parents were substance abuse addicts. My mom, I watched her get clean, I watched her process the recovery, and I watched what it took for her to go and actually get housing. So I lived through that, through elementary school, through middle school, through high school. Having those steps of leveling up, having the steps of applying for applications, and then, it definitely reflected in my trajectory of working in the field of housing and in nonprofits and connecting people to services. So I work with a lot of people who, for some reason or another, have ended up on the fringe. And what it takes for an individual who doesn't have access to their birth certificate to get an ID, to get their identification verified, to actually have benefits, to then be able to build a resume, to have access to education, to get your GED. There's so much. If you don't have an actual address, how are you going to be able to get all of your communication reliably? A lot of these programs that are out here will not really, they're not going to reach out. So all of the work and onus is on you as an individual, and then you're met with so many different checks and blockages that are really just extremely dehumanizing and demoralizing. And we also attach, speaking of demoralizing, we attach moral identities to the wealth that people can amass.
Yeah, when I was in college and I took economics, the first thing that came to my mind was that good people aren't rewarded the highest. And I thought, wow, if morality and being good and being considerate and being just taking others in consideration, if that's not rewarded the highest, then you're going to have a problem with keeping communities going. And like they say, the difference between conservative and progressive is conservatives focus on individual success and progressives will care about national welfare, And so we've got these bureaucracies that have become punitive. I mean, they call them civil servants, which means they should be out there helping you, looking to help you, like actually seeking you out in your neighborhood, in your house, in your thing, and saying, don't worry. People have navigated this before. It's easy. We've streamlined it to make it to facilitate success. But instead, it's become this penalty thing of like, you don't understand, one person committed fraud, so now, like recently somebody said, the DMV wants me to prove who I am to give me a photo ID, but if they take me to jail, they pull up my whole history. How can two government agencies, one says they don't know who I am and the other one knows me better than myself? Jefferson said government is the prize, it's not the enemy. And the problem is that the people, and then FDR said, you can't believe how many people are invested in bad government. So the people who are invested in bad government get control of it, and they make the government punishing to the people, and then people turn against the government when the government is the tool they need to pull themselves and raise their quality of life. Not even our material standard of living. You're talking about necessities. We're talking about quality of life.
Yeah, necessities, the ability to clothe and house and feed yourself. The idea that you will be able to grind yourself out of poverty, that you will be able, if you just put in the work, the hours, that you can magically reach this end cap and raise yourself from baseline poverty to middle class is extremely damaging. So people literally just work themselves to death. And the people ask, because my story has an insane trajectory, and I always tell people I am stressed and blessed, but it is not purely built on my work. It is that I had the fortunate ability to read and to understand what I'm reading and to have access, because despite not having access to housing, I did have very educated individuals around me who were able to point me into the right direction. And because of the conditions that I was living in, education and books became my savior. That became my way of coping with what I was doing, because I could escape into another world. And being able to have that has served me well. And I know that not everybody that has been or is currently in the positions that I was in will be able to do that. When you talk about people's mental health, when they don't have access to running water, when people are constantly literally treating them as if they are subpar, as if they don't deserve good things, like you don't deserve to eat because your face is not clean, that is so damaging, and you can't even advocate for yourself. And maybe if you are able to find places like a library, well, maybe you're not actually welcome in that space to actually print the paperwork that you need, because they're just like, oh, well, you're
When was the
making it
last time you
uncomfortable.
bathed?
When was the last time you bathed?
I believe everybody has the right to a clean ass. And I don't understand why we don't have public facilities for everyone who lives in their car or lives on the street or finds themselves just public. There should be more restrooms open to the public. I mean, we used to make gas stations take on the role of having a public restroom. And then they say, oh, people come in and they vandalize it, blah, blah, blah. So then, I mean, nowadays, Starbucks is the public restroom place. And it looks vandalized at times.
I was going to say, it's funny because there's a lot going wrong in Texas, but Buc-ee's, if you've heard about Buc-ee's, it's a truck stop, and they are known for their giant, beautiful restrooms.
Wow.
And as far as I could tell, if you compare a place like San Antonio and their use of Buc-ee's, there's also more land there, right? San Antonio compared to San Francisco, real estate wise, it's, you couldn't really argue that point, but the fact that there's no place in San Francisco for people to actually go into a restroom that is open to the public, that is clean, that is well manned, that is secure, is a huge issue, because then you want to yell at people for using the restroom on the street, but you haven't provided them a space to go.
It's a public health hazard not to provide facilities for everybody. I mean, there's diseases coming back in Los Angeles like typhoid and
Just
things
things you've never heard of. I mean, 100 years.
Things from another century because of the lack of services for unhoused people. And when you look at the challenge of finding housing, it's really daunting. 3 times, 5 times your income required, first and last, and a deposit. I mean, we're talking about a huge amount of money
You need
just
that
to put a roof over your head.
Yeah, you need that small inheritance to step onto the playing field. I mean, they've made, not only is the playing field tilted, but then it's elevated that you can't even get on it. I was thinking about how when I met you, you said growing up that you wanted to be middle class, that was your thing. And what did middle class mean to you?
Well, my neighbors, Alma and Bob Lee, were middle class, and they had dinner every night at 5, and they had a beautiful clean house, and they had 2 cars, and they had a 3-bedroom house. And so I thought that was middle class, and so people would say, India, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd just be like, middle class.
Middle class. For me, it was, I took a trip when I was younger to Tennessee, and I visited one of their art museums, and they had a Norman Rockwell exhibit. And I think I was like 12 years old, and that left such a huge impression on me, because in this like magical flashback to the good old days, you had the barbershop quartets, and you had people who could literally make a living selling milkshakes and burgers and going to diners, and you saw the family photos of children playing sports and people having the family dinners and being able to gather around. And it wasn't anything that was depictions of exorbitant wealth. You know, nobody was rocking, you know, the Rolls Royces or wearing, you know, extravagant jewelry and furs. It was just literally, you have clean clothes and you can eat and you have a safe place to sleep at night and you have electricity and you're warm.
And secure.
It was secure. Like the fact that you can have a home base and stability and develop a way of life for yourself that actually fits into your rhythm. That was the goal, a sense of freedom.
Well, the GI Bill is what built the American middle class. And it was all these veterans came back, and after having World War I have ended just 30 years before, and the veterans coming back to being unemployed, you know, our country had this whole idea that you're a hero overseas, but you're a bum at home. And so they had a 5220 club, which was you got 52 weeks of unemployment when you got back from the war. And then you got a no money down home loan guarantee with a fixed interest rate, so that you, if you got a job, it'd only be like 25% of your income would go for housing. Like, we invented money, so money can't be an obstacle to our progress, because it's like tying our shoes together and then saying we can't walk. And what's exciting about money being the brainchild of humanity, because no other creature assigns value to an inanimate object and then uses it as a store of value in trade. So there's no unexplainable forces in money. The outcome of our money system is predictable. And we've created a monetary structure that makes sure that 25-30% of the population is going to fail. So, I mean, it's structural. And what's so amazing about human beings is that we're such moral creatures, and so we make it all about ourselves, that we feel that our social failure is our personal failure when it was structured that way. It was going to be you or someone else.
Right. Can we talk about the layoffs real quick?
Right. You know, yeah, and the AI coming in and robotics and stuff like that. And so instead of shortening the work week, like, people think that the middle class is, oh, these people got the education, they worked really hard and they made middle management, now they get a home, their kids get to go to college, they have health care, and they have a retirement. But the truth is that the middle class isn't because of those efforts. The middle class is because of the way corporate profits were divided. And so they had a tax code that made corporate profits have to go to the employees of that corporation rather than the investors. And then what happened was, in the 70s and 80s, they changed the tax code so that the investors could walk off with all the money. Like, there's nothing that says that a CEO's hour is worth more than a janitor's hour. So, I mean, we could have it where corporations, because they're government chartered. You got to remember, these are government corporations, is that I have a proposal: one wage, one company. Everybody in the company gets paid the same. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
Yeah. And then you go,
A
oh,
golden
no.
parachute for everyone.
Right. And you go, how about we do a tiered pay scale, but not that steep?
Well, like in
Why is a
Japan.
CEO making 1,000 times more than a janitor? That janitor deserves a home. He deserves to send his kids to college. She deserves to be taken care of when she gets sick and be taken care of in retirement. I mean, and the money system can be structured this way. We've solved the production problem. Because it's technical. We haven't solved the distribution problem because it's political.
Well said. Yeah. Well, in Japan, the rule, as far as I know, is 19 times. So the CEO cannot make more than 19 times the wage of the lowest wage earner in the company.
I love that. I also think we have these really twisted ideas around what qualifies as skilled labor. Because I love the fact that you brought up, like, why is your hour worth so much more? What are you accomplishing in that hour? Who is actually like watching what you accomplish in that hour? And I think that's really fascinating because I find that people of the lower class work hard. So many more hours. When I tell you that I know people who are literally putting in 12-hour days to turn around and go home and have to put in another 3 or 4 hours cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, parenting, making sure that their children are prepared for the next day, and then getting the most minimal amount of sleep you could imagine, and then doing it all again the very next day. Why is their time not worth more?
Right, and somebody like that, that you're just saying about how much of their time is allocated in their success, is the reason we say, well, a person building a business, you don't understand, they have to live and sleep their business. Well, people are living and sleeping their existence, their survival.
Their 3 jobs.
That have 3 jobs, yeah. I mean, that person should be elevated to a higher status in our society if it was fair. Another thing about wages and, I always say time is all you have to spend. That's why they pay you per hour. But one of the reasons that women have historically been paid less than men is because emotional labor isn't valued the same as physical labor. So a guy on the dock lifting 50-pound bags into a truck is getting paid more than the woman who is in front fielding clients' complaints and stuff like that. And to think that you say, well, she can't lift 50-pound bags, which, no one ever was concerned about women in the healthcare industry lifting people out of bed. You
right.
know?
I was going to say, as someone who's worked
Right.
as a social worker,
Right.
the amount of times I've heard like, oh, she's just a social worker. And I was like, you don't understand. When the police come to our building,
Right.
They are not going up to the rooms immediately. They're coming to us and saying, oh, what should we do about this? How should we field this? Have you gone up? And I was like, you're the one we're supposed to call when someone's 5150. Like, there's a process. I was like, so you are not comfortable doing your job. Your only thought in this moment is to violently apprehend this person, to beat them. I was like, so you don't have any de-escalation skills for this person?
That's
who is
emotional
clearly
labor.
that's emotional labor.
Yeah,
and physical labor.
Yes. Well, emotional labor takes a physical toll. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that, that you think of teachers, all the historic jobs that have been assigned to women have always been interpersonal.
And lower wage.
And yet there's no reason to value that work less than a guy on a jackhammer or a guy working a longshoreman.
So just to stir the pot, hot take, do you think that our housing crisis is also tied to the challenges that is facing patriarchal organizations now that there are more women who are having access to higher education, more women who are applying to loans? This is just a lens that I think of in just my own personal intersectionality of having to go into banks and apply for loans and being in an area that historically has been segregated and has gate-kept individuals who look like me from having access to those resources.
Definitely. Absolutely. We talked to a woman who is a small business owner this morning, and she was saying how getting a loan was almost impossible to start her very successful small business, which is, almost a unicorn in today's corporate monopolized economy. How many small businesses are actually making it? But she was saying that as a woman getting a loan, and I know we are also small business people, but I know for Jimmy, they're hounding him to take money.
Right.
They're like, please borrow money. We're like, no, thank you.
I passed the pigment test and the other test.
Ball bearing test.
Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right because, I've talked to a lot of people in the work that I do, and the older women are always telling me about how it was impossible to get a credit card, a divorce. I mean, all the aspects of whose name the house could be in, even though they were the breadwinner. And that's the recent past. I mean, we're talking 1970s, and then I remember when I first came upon women's studies and women's rights, is that, in this country, I was like, wow, everybody has it hard, everybody has what, but then if you look historically, you look around the world and you look at the demographics and all that, you just realize what a disadvantage and unfair. I mean, we're supposed to be a level playing field, and no one talks about that. It's like if someone has the ability to skew it all towards their favor, that we're allowing that, and that can't be. I mean,
Well,
we can't have a two-class society of have and have-nots. The only solution to class warfare of a small minority in power and the mass majority is to have a middle class, to grow a middle class. And we did that in this country, and we did it through the GI Bill. And so we have to look at how are we going to implement something substantial and something the equivalent of that. And you don't have to have served the people whose personal philosophy divides the world into those who are deserving and those who are undeserving. That's the problem. I don't care. There's no more us and them thinking. It's us. That's the way it's got to be.
Right. We have a problem. All of us.
Right.
It's a huge problem.
Well, I am not up on the latest statistics. I took women's studies in the 90s, and I remember finding out as a young woman that women owned 1% of the property in the world at that time, in probably like 95.
How insane is that? 1%.
Yeah, 1% of the world. And I wonder how much women own now. That would be interesting.
Remember the lessons of microloans in foreign countries was that they found if they gave the money to the men, it didn't work out so well, and if they gave the money to the women, then everybody got taken care of,
Aww.
and
it is the policy. Yeah, it's the policy of most microloan charities around the world that they just only give them to women.
So the patterns of bubbles and bubbles popping and prices for housing just skyrocketing and then plummeting, and this is a pattern that happens over and over and over again. Can we speak on that and how it pertains to housing?
is housing in the 1930s became a problem because of the Depression. So all the mortgages were delinquent.
Which we're depressed today. Like, we're in a depression. We've been in a
Right.
depression. I'm letting y'all know. If you didn't know, we're depressed today.
Right, and depression and stuff has always been regional. Like one region could be flourishing and another one be depressed. So, and depression the joke is that the difference between a recession and a depression is a recession is your neighbor loses his job. Depression is you lose your job, But FDR made a move there, and what he did was he bought all the bad mortgages from the banks, and he bailed them out. And this is what we should have done in 2007. And then he restructured the loans by creating the 20-year mortgage, which banks would only lend for 5 years max. So the private sector constantly is inadequate. We've tried the private sector to do things, and it never will, because it has to make... The profit motive means you get back more than you give. And that's why, if the core of our economic philosophy is to get back more than you give. Imagine being in a family where you're just making sure you get more than you give, get more than you give. I mean, we got a whole...
That's a dysfunctional family.
Right. But what FDR said was that, look, houses are a necessity. I don't want them to become a commodity of speculation. And so he set up what he called a firewall. And part of that was... he said, never let gamblers get control of the credit market, because they will run prices up and cause these bubbles and everything like that. And right now, we have, on both sides, the neoliberals and the conservatives are both oriented towards corporate profits. And the Supreme Court exists to enforce property rights. And its human rights record is all secondary. It would rather... injunction to go beat up workers than to side with workers that they should get a bigger share of the profits, of corporate profits. Now we're allowing corporations to invest in houses with their resources to outbid us.
And that's just going through the roof. Thank you to Ocasio-Cortez, who got on the Senate floor last year, and she did a big investigation and expose that some up to 30% of homes in some communities are being owned by Wall Street investment groups. And so they're buying up sometimes housing developments of over 5,000 homes, and they're buying them before they even hit the market. They're getting a lower interest rate than an individual would get. They're paying in cash, so they're getting a lower price. They have all the stats and all the data to know that every home they buy is a winner. They don't buy in markets where where the forecast isn't that they're going to make a huge profit. So
isn't this like in-house trading? I thought this was like illegal. Like if you know tips beforehand and then you profit off. Did Martha Stewart go to jail for this? Like, wait a minute. What's happening here?
How is this legal? It shouldn't be. And that's what FDR had made this shady dealing. He had made it illegal, and it was called the Glass-Steagall Act, that there could not be speculation and investment on people's on homes. So that was dismantled when, Jimmy?
Under Clinton in '98. The thing is that one of the reasons we're suffering all this is that there used to be a two-party system, and one party represented workers. And with the losses of the Democratic Party in the 1980s, Clinton said, "Hey, I'm going to take Wall Street money, and I'm not going to represent the workers anymore." And so he oversaw, which had already started under Reagan, the downsizing of America, and also the shipping of the jobs offshore. So, we have a problem with the red states is that these people are angry. They don't know who's at fault. But I mean, seriously, they got gutted in the 1980s and 90s when they lost all their high-paying manufacturing and industrial jobs. And then they got their kids sent off to a war that was based on lies. I mean, even George Bush Jr. keeps admitting that it was a lie that they invaded Iraq. And then they got all the doctors prescribing opiates for them, saying it was non-addictive, and their college quarterback with a knee injury in 3 days was getting addicted. So, I mean, these people are having a hard time trusting government, and yet government is the only thing that's going to solve them from being chewed up and spit out by corporations. And the government is a corporate government. There's two governments. There's a citizen government and there's a corporate government. Just like there's a First Amendment for me and a First Amendment for corporations. They want to pander. I want to protest. They get protected. I get shut down.
Arrested. Or
arrested.
Murdered, or just disappeared.
Well, and one of the things that was when Jimmy Carter left office and Reagan came in, they had the SEC, which was founded by the Glass-Steagall Act, the Securities Exchange Commission. The head of the SEC said, look, CEOs have to go to prison. And he said the reason why is that if you say that if their corporation gets caught in any illegality, the head guy goes to prison and they'll self-police so that they will look over their corporation and make sure they're not going to go to prison for something an underling has done. He said, but if they don't go to prison, then they'll turn a blind eye to anything that's making them profit, and actually create a corporate culture in which, you got to realize corporations have no ethics, no morals. They like the letter of the law. They don't like the spirit of the law. They think their job is to get around the law to make more money. That's all their focus is that they want to avoid following the law.
Well, and this corporate investment in single-family homes was the cause of the 2008-2007 crash. And what's interesting is that none of the laws were changed. So we're going again. Yes. They're doing it again. Kind of circling back to Kylie's question about the bubble. I mean, we had this huge bubble. It popped. We had a recession, depression, whatever you want to call it. No regulations were put in place after that. crash.
And being right here where we're at, I mean, we're at the epicenter of this bubble because the first bubble was the tech bubble. And it was the changing of accounting rules in the tech industry that allowed, because I remember the front page of the San Jose Mercury saying, here's all the tech guys who walked away with 90% of all the money and left all the shareholders and employees bankrupt.
Oh, it was like, it was a list of like 100 companies. And it was like, this CEO left with 98.9% of this company's wealth.
Yeah.
And now that company is bankrupt. And they had this expose in the San Jose Mercury, I remember. And it was just basically like all the tech company CEOs,
all the CEOs
just walked off with all the money. So that, it wasn't so much, I mean, I think it was very euphemistic to call it a bubble. It was really like a massive legal theft.
And then everybody looked and said, oh, they'll change the laws to prevent what made the tech bubble possible. And they didn't. And then that became the subprime debacle. And they moved it nationwide. And then that was all the city centers that went that. And then they said, okay, now that we have this debacle, they'll change the laws to make sure this won't happen again. Because it's all about gamblers getting control of the credit market because that's how they inflate prices. Okay, so then now the subprime debacle has moved to the outskirts. I have people coming into my booth from Montana saying that the home prices in their little town have been bid up where their children can't live down the street from them anymore. And the Montana woman is sitting there telling me, these people are crazy. The weather's only good for 4 months. They come there, they think it's beautiful, but they don't realize that the other winter, they're not going to want to be here. And the same with people coming in from Idaho. I mean, you started looking at whose housing prices were shooting up first, and it was the infilling of the subprime debacle.
So you had talked about gambling, and we just had a bank in Silicon Valley go under, and it was bailed out. So in terms of housing, 'cause a lot of people can't afford to buy their houses flat out, right? They're paying mortgages, they have loans that are tied to these banks, and the trust that people put that their money is going to be safe in a bank. And like you said, people are gambling, and I don't think the education is right. Like, I didn't know really in high school that when you put your money into a bank, that then they can just go and do whatever. And if they fail for some reason, well, depending on the type of bank, if you didn't read all of the laws and the small print, you may not be insured and your money may not be safe. So what is your response to that crisis, and as it also pertains to housing and stability?
Right. So deposit insurance, again, was an FDR program, and he wanted the small saver who wasn't financially sophisticated to be safe. Mm-hmm. And what happened was it started off at $2,500. If you had $2,500. Well, during the S&L crisis, that was another thing, is that FDR split the banking between investment banks and depository institutions. And he also came up with the savings and loan system, which was just to help you with low interest loans to start a business or to start a home. They actually had a geographic limitation that they could only make loans within 90 miles of their physical location. So in 79, they pulled that, and all of a sudden, savings and loan were actually selling insured accounts for higher interest rates. This is one of those things that there should be one account per Social Security number that is insured. So if I'm a rich guy and I've got, it's $250,000 now or whatever, I've got 100 $250,000 accounts, and all of them are insured because they're all under the legal limit, right? But it should be one Social Security number, because the rich guy is supposed to be financially sophisticated to put market discipline on the good and bad banks. He's the one that should be checking their records and doing it. And if his money's at risk, he will. If his money is not at risk, that he's just gambling with guaranteed money, then he won't. Then the free market doesn't work. And banking is one of those. They create money by writing a number in an account. And if that, wouldn't that be fun to just go home? You're just like,
yes, I'm going to pay myself today.
Right.
treat yourself.
And that is so powerful in an economy in which money considerations lead to suicide, divorce, families breaking up, neighbors, everything, boss. Money considerations are the most important thing. It's the lifeblood, and all of our problems that we're talking about, homes, medical care, it comes down to money. And yet there's this entity out there, banks, that can create money. And we are not adequately supervising them. We're not adequate. I mean, that's powerful. Like we should elect those guys. Like I mean, who do we want? We want Michael Milken in charge of the banking structure, because that's what we got now. And all of that's happening because our the profits that they've made have made it so that they could buy up the entire political system. And so everyone gets into office beholden to their corporate sponsors, and then they appoint. That's why the Supreme Court is just packed with corporate lawyers. Doesn't matter if it's a Democratic president or a Republican president picking them. We're going to get people who are just, profits are more important than people, property is more important than people, and then
Investments are more important than housing people.
right. And that's why the Supreme Court has never been on the cutting edge of civil rights. It's always been on holding corporate rights over people. And I think, we really got to realize that there's the citizenry, corporations are collectives. They're like the worst of communism. They financially pool their money. They create an authoritarian workplace in which tyranny is happening. So, I mean, corporations are communistic in that they have collective property, collective finances, and stuff like that. But society, they go and they're like, but you as workers cannot collectively negotiate, collectively bargain. You can't do unions. And yet they're colluding all the time because they know it works. The big failure is price competition, is that everybody will undercut each other price-wise until they all go bankrupt. And that's what they've got us workers doing, is that we're in price competition. I'll work for less, I'll work for less. But corporations, what they do is they just go, okay, we're going to set this price so that we make this much money on every unit produced, and then we'll just split the market. And then none of us ever will cut the price and drive us into bankruptcy. But they make us as workers and as citizens, we're undercutting each other to poverty.
Mm-hmm. Wages are stagnant at best, while housing is just skyrocketing.
And profits, we'd have profit inflation. We don't have price inflation. We have profit inflation and spilling over into prices.
One exciting thing in the realm of housing is that the City Council of Monterey last night had a meeting, and the topic was housing. And one of the proposals I hope that is going to be adopted is a rental registry to clarify who are the owners of the homes. And I'm really excited to find out, are these individual landlords who have driven up the rent so high that there's, this is the epicenter of a homeless crisis, or has Monterey fallen victim to one of these real estate investment companies that's owning thousands of homes on the peninsula? I'm really curious to see who's owning the homes on the peninsula, and that's one of the things that's the first step to a solution, is the identification of the problem.
I really love that level of transparency as well, because I think about all the houses that I drive by that are empty. And I remember a couple years back, I think maybe probably like 5 or 6 years back now, they had passed some legislative laws in Sand City and Seaside and Monterey, putting a cap on how many homes you could have that were just summer homes. So it's like, we are having a real housing crisis here. So if you don't actually live here, if you're just buying property here because it's nice and you want to visit, but for the majority of the year it's empty, well, then that's a huge problem. And it just makes me think about how many people, like now Airbnb is so popular. It's like, how many people are just buying these properties, using them for, Airbnb. That's also something that is present here that people don't think about when you do have businesses that are owning homes. It's like, well, what is that business doing, and how is that business going to affect the environment that you're in? Do you want people who are really conducting business to be your neighbors, because then they're also not keeping like working class hours necessarily, which I think is also fascinating, to think of like which communities are very, very quiet, and are having police force to come enforce those rules, and which communities are working class, and you're expecting that there's going to be music, and you're expecting that there's going to be food, and you're expecting that people are going to stay up late because they have to work all day, and then when they get home, that's when they get to actually do their living. So it's also this idea of, if you have a home as your home base, how free are you to actually like express and live in that home base, or are you expected to operate your home base as if it's still a 9 to 5 business, and you have to be quiet outside of those hours? So it's like cultural ramifications of like the homelessness problem as well.
And who's being regulated heavily? Which neighborhoods they're getting regulated? Basically, the government is not working for us. It's not regulating the big companies, but it is regulating individuals, and especially, like you're saying, in the working class neighborhoods, there's over-regulation. Yeah.
Well, we're not getting our bang for our buck from the government. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that we're supposed to pool $5 and it's supposed to give us like $10 worth of services. But, I came from a university town, and it was required that you had to live 3 years in a house before you could rent it. Another thing is, in Ireland, if you're a foreigner and you come buy a home, it's going to be 100% capital gains tax on the appreciation of that home. So there are, and locality, I think, property tax is a local tax. So you have a lot of authority over homes in your locality, because that's what we got to start looking at. Supreme Court always wants to say your locality can't do that. Supreme Court took away states' rights, is that they don't want usury, they don't want people with money to be regulated of how much they can sell their money, because interest rate is the price of money.
Can you break down the definition of usury? We've seen it in biblical terms, we've seen it in economics, we've seen it in just general, like, oh, you're a user and an abuser. I feel like those terms are used interchangeably. Can you...
The wealthy and the corporations immediately got together with Foundation of the United States, and they said, we want to make sure that the Bible is never used in the courtroom because it has usury laws.
Yeah.
And so the wealthy and the corporations were just like, we don't want the 10 Commandments, we don't want any of that, because God should mind his own business and not ours.
And
That's what they said.
Right. And what is usury in the Bible?
Usury is like 5%.
Interest.
10%.
Interest.
Okay, another thing that the wealthy and the corporations did with the legal system was that we used to have a thing called judges. And what judges did was they judged the fairness of a contract. And they would see if a person was in a position of power to exploit another person, and they would throw that out. And that's usury, is you're in a position to exploit someone. And the wealthy and the corporations decided that, no, we want to have it, take it or leave it contracts.
Talk about leases nowadays.
Right. And take it or leave it contracts, rental agreements, stuff like that. And so the corporations and the wealthy got together and they said, look, we don't want courts of justice. We want courts of law. And courts of law enforce contracts. Courts of justice actually judge the fairness of cases. And that's why now we turn to the courts and we realize that we're not in a position to, because they're not looking for justice. They're looking for, did someone sign a contract? Whose property is being violated? Rather than our rights get violated, but because their property is more important.
I think that's one of the things that the city council was talking about last night, was tenant rights, a moratorium on evictions, limiting how much you can raise rents, and also one of the solutions that was put forward was a tax on empty homes. So I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen with Monterey City government. They've put out some great ideas, had a great discussion, and I look forward to see where it goes from there. And I'm just really so excited to find out who owns the homes.
Well, and being a landlord has to be so terrible that people don't want to be landlords anymore. If being a landlord is the greatest thing on earth, then we're going to have a lot of homeless people. But if being a landlord is like, oh my God, who would want to do that? It's stacked against us. Just get rid of the property. And the truth is that people who own their own space take care of it. And people who are renters aren't the greatest people to caretake a space. So you actually want, there's a difference between living in a neighborhood of renters and living in a neighborhood of homeowners. We all know it. So the truth is that the renter culture isn't as stable as the homeowner culture. And so being a landlord has to be made so it sucks. Like so bad, like, oh my God, you're a landlord? How do you even manage that? That sounds terrible. I've never imagined myself as a landlord because
the taxes are so high, the regulations are so high.
And I can get in trouble in so many ways, and I can lose everything. And the only way to get people to disconnect with this multiple home ownership and real estate ownership is to make it so there's a disincentive.
A financial disincentive.
There's a disincentive.
So we have an interesting idea around the fact that everybody should have a home, right? So what do you think, because you've been exposed to so many different cultures, about multi-generational living? And the fact that we have kind of strayed from that. The expectation here is that once you turn 18, you are out of the house, you are your own individual, you are supposed to get your own land, build your own home. What happened to the idea that you would actually have a giant family home on like one larger piece of property, and that you would just build in-law units and add on to that and actually have your own homestead for a family that is large? What do you guys think happened to that idea?
Well, it's still happening in Mexico. And the renters have so many rights in Mexico that really they can stay in a home for about a year after they've stopped paying rent. So renting is renting is not that common. It's not really worth it to the owner to do. Most everybody stays on property, and you just keep building granny units. And one of the things that we admire so much about the Mexican culture is they have really strong family ties, and a lot of that is structured through the real estate. It's a necessity. You're not going to move off property in Mexico, most likely.
Mexico doesn't have a really good credit structure, so there's not mortgages. So the other thing is that everybody owns their own home. Nobody is looking at a mortgage every month to make. So basically the money that's coming onto property gets to be spent on the people on property. It's not being exported to a bank.
You used the term the other day, which is, I think it was wage slave?
High debt, low wage slave. And it's, and it means that they don't have to take care of you, ever. And
because you've done this to yourself, right? You put yourself in debt, and now you have to dig yourself out of debt, and good luck with that.
Right. And the thing is that why did we have high wages at one time is that you place a marginal tax bracket rate, so that like if you're a small company, you only make so much, then you pay a percentage of your profits in tax. But like a big corporation, you hit them at such a high rate that they want to spend that money so they don't get taxed away. And the way they can spend the money is by raising wages. So the tax code is the only way to lift the lower classes, is you have to have higher taxes on the upper class. And one of the things that people forget is that money is not a private possession. It's a public good. You'd be on an isolated island and with all the money in the world, and it means nothing. Money only has value in relation to others, and so its responsibility is to us all. And I think that's where we got off track, is that America was that everybody had the opportunity to become middle class. Push cart to storefront. and like we've fought for street vending laws, is that talk about bootstrap economy. Set up and you have something to peddle on the street and you make enough money that you ultimately move it into a storefront. Now I realize that storefronts, brick and mortar, have been destroyed by Amazon. That it has nothing to do with street vendors.
Right. So I remember, like even the messaging from like middle school onward was that monopolies were bad. The government was supposed to be in charge of making sure that mom and pop shops were still viable, and that anytime you had a monopoly, you had such an imbalance of power that someone had to intervene. Someone being the government would step in and intervene. But now we've gone so far to the other end, especially with COVID, where everybody is so individualized. There is no mom and pop shop. Like you said, there's Amazon and there's Walmart, and all of these corporations are all owned by like the top 3 or 4 or 5 around the world globally. So how
Very
do
good.
you address that?
Yeah. Well, what do monopolies lead to? They lead to what's called monopoly profits. What do they do with their monopoly profits? They buy up the entire media and they buy up the political system, because a free market says everything gets to be controlled by the highest bidder. We know that the people that are the richest are the least capable of taking other people into consideration. That's how they got so rich, is that they can't take care of community. They can't take care of general welfare. That's not within their wheelhouse. They're narrow focused into, they've got the numeric addiction, is that they want to see how big their bank account is. Otherwise, they give it away. I mean, they're not okay mentally.
Well, it's a hoarding disorder. So
Yeah.
we have some money hoarding disorder going on. I'd like to see like Elon Musk on an episode of Hoarders.
Yeah,
I mean, so it's like, because technically he's hoarding a lot of things, not just the technology. I always think it's kind of interesting when you have wealthy moguls who then decide to have like a bunch of different surrogates for their children. And then I wonder how those children grow up, and it's because they're like, oh, well, I have enough money to just pay for the welfare of that child. And then you're like, but parenting and all of these other things. And they're like, it's fine. They have money. They have a trust. They're taken care of. But I'm just like, that is also strange, because I think about Nick Cannon and the fact that it's like, so you've got like, what, 7, 9 children out there. And it's like you are in a bracket to be able to do so. But the flip side and the, I guess, darker messaging of that is that poverty, as we've discussed, is a political design. And then you tell people who are impoverished that they are not deserving to have children because they cannot support those children. And then on top of that, you take away the ability for them to actually regulate their birthing. So you take away the education, you take away all of the access to actual health care, things like abortion, and now you've criminalized them from every side. You are now a criminal because you're poor, you're a criminal because you can't be a homeowner, you're a criminal because you're not working, because you don't have an address, you're a criminal because you've, just as a human function, decided to have a partner and have children. You can't control your birthing. We all know that abstinence does not work, and these are serious human rights issues that people, for some reason, don't want to actually look directly at, because it is ugly and extremely debilitating. And now we even have discussions of gender identification and whether or not that qualifies you to be a parent. And so, like, that is so interesting that we prioritize also, two-parent homes. So as a single parent, your access to housing might be more difficult. Or there's the converse discussion of, there are families who have chosen not to get married on paper because they get more access to benefits as a single parent, who have chosen not to get married because if I get married, my partner could lose their housing because they got their housing as a single parent and would not be able to maintain that. I can't live I physically cannot live with my kids because if I do that, it puts their housing at jeopardy. Like all of these.
Those are rational decisions.
Yeah, this is a design, and we could be clearly doing something about it. Just tying also back into homelessness and poverty, and just what I have seen and observed. As parents, what is y'all's take on that?
Well, our children aren't having children because they're, got student debt and home prices look unreachable. And, it's the older generations have just decided that there's no room for the younger generations. I put it in the framework of, has our species lost its will to survive?
Well, we raised a family in Monterey, and that is definitely something that is not an option for our children. So in one generation, we've gone completely to...
Our rent went from $800 to $1,850, and that was 20 years ago. And I went to the landlord and I said, how can you charge a family $1,800 for a 3-bedroom house? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, my friend's getting $2,100. That was his measuring stick. So that's what I'm saying, is that these people have lost their humanity. They think that it's a numbers game. And one of the reasons why is that we don't have the civic equipment that we used to. We have to have facilities that allow for personal relationships and community involvement. And part of that is that we gave the automobile priority. And so you can drive, look what we've done. We've put streets between every row of houses so that every child has to grow up with, like, don't run in the road, you're going to get killed, rather than play space for them. So, if we could move away from the automobile and make, I have a thing called the suburban reformation. If we could make it where we gave pedestrian traffic priority, we would start to meet our neighbors. We'd meet each other. There's just ways of... What's nice about humanity is that we pick our purpose. We've outgrown our natural limitations. And so now we pick our purpose, and our purpose has to be to perpetuate the species. And that has to be where we learn that we have intergenerational responsibilities. Because perpetuating the species is not, if the world ends the day after I die, I planned it perfect. That was the Reagan era. They were just like, man, if the world ends the day after I die, it was a perfect life.
Oh, there was bumper stickers on cars in the 80s that said spending my children's or grandchildren's inheritance. That was like a popular bumper sticker in the 80s.
And that is the philosophy now of the older generations. They're spending their children's finite resources, they're spending their children's clean air, and they don't care, and they're not willing to organize and rise up against themselves. They call the people born in the 30s, they call them the silent generation, is that they just went along with everything and they're not going to make waves. And then we have the baby boomers, and the baby boomers were like, this is what makes me happy. And that was a cultural revolution. But they're now just telling the young people, you don't know what's going on. And then we had what is a printing press revolution, is that we actually moved to a new medium. I read books on hard copy. And you know what I mean? And because I'm of an older generation, and I'm trying to convert books into digital information. There was a lot of wisdom that was lost when we went from oral history to a written history. And there's going to be a lot lost now when we go from a written history into this audiovisual world. And
I was going to say, I feel like this medium is our oral history, and a lot of people are listening to podcasts. And I think we had also talked about the fact that, like, cable access is because of, things like Amazon and all of these streaming services. Cable is becoming a little more obsolete, and what's going to happen to the few mainstream medias that we have to be able to communicate with one each other that really keeps us unified?
How can we reach the public mind? How can we coordinate our individual activities to produce something socially greater than ourselves? And
yeah, AMP is the First Amendment. So there's not that many ways to fulfill the First Amendment these days, with the corporate media being so monopolized, with just 6 companies, I think is the latest news, is that control almost all of the media outlets. So AMP is this incredibly precious resource to the public, to the people, to fulfill the promise of the First Amendment. And so the First Amendment is really meaningful in this space. And where,
Literally this space.
yeah.
This
And-
is the civic equipment that everybody can come down and utilize and needs to. I mean, my fear is that we're getting this corporate cultural homogenization. Like we travel quite a bit, and I mean, if I hear Hotel California one more time, I could be on the other side of the planet. I could be in Turkey. I could be a Muslim country, and Hotel California is playing. Like, what happened to their regional flair?
Oh, you know what the number one TV show is in Turkey?
Resurrection Ertugrul? Is it Resurrection Ertugrul?
It's Friends.
It's Friends.
Oh my gosh.
Friends is huge, and they've watched it. Everybody wanted to know if we'd seen Friends, and I was like,
Everybody wanted to talk to us about Friends in Turkey.
when we first went to Mexico, I always said, wow, they don't have the psychological sophistication of our media, and what they need is Seinfeld, because Seinfeld was always like taking these abstract ways of looking at things, and the truth is Friends is, you try to tell people around the world what's going on in the United States, and they say, oh, I watch TV. I know more than you, even though you live there. And that's the hard thing. We have a great media propaganda machine.
I was gonna say, so like even the fact that the show is Friends and not Girlfriends or Living Single or any of those other multicultural BIPOC
Right.
shows that were thriving in the 90s. What? I was like, so like that, even the projection, I was like, I talk a lot about like why representation is so important, and I was just like, how funny that Friends is the show that's being talked about in Turkey and not any of these other shows that were, I mean, in my opinion, hands down, way better and a far better nuanced way of exploring what it really is to have an American experience. So,
Well, and they also show people who have low wage jobs owning really nice houses. I mean, there's that's one of the reasons we were teaching media literacy, is that people don't realize everything on TV is a construct.
yeah, Rachel should have been dressing from Ross. There's no reason why Rachel should have ever owned all of her like leather boots and skirts. Like she should have looked like Phoebe. Phoebe looks like someone who thrifts. Phoebe does thrift. And that is probably the most realistic representation on that show of someone who is actually having a normal experience. Phoebe is constantly finding ways to like break through the depression of things with her songs. Like Smelly Cat, can we talk about what's happening with Smelly Cat? She sings about the fact that the owner of this cat is literally just letting it rot, and that it's not the cat's fault. And I don't know, this just might be all of us in America just sympathizing and feeling with the cat, because that is what's happening to us. Smelly cat, it is not your fault, okay?
It's structured.
True.
It's structured that way.
It's structured that way.
Yeah.
Well, in Turkey, they have cats and dogs in every store, restaurant.
Street cats and dogs, and it's been legislated that people have to take care of them, and the government actually allocates money to make sure that they have cardboard houses on the street and everything, and
With the
big
government,
dogs,
government seal on a little like
right?
cat
yeah.
house.
Oh, that is adorable.
They buy
Yeah.
50,000 tons of animal food a year, the government, to make sure that all animals are fed during the pandemic.
They take care of their street animals better than we take care of our street people.
This is so true.
But, it's Muslim, so, like, the women are not anywhere. They're only allowed in their certain spaces. So, I mean, there's the oppression going on, too. There's no alcohol, so there's no...
Well, there's some alcohol, but yeah, there's not much. I never saw anybody on drugs or drinking or drunk or anything the whole time we were there. We were there about a month. And then as soon as we flew into Athens, there was like people shooting up in the street.
Jesus.
So, I don't know. Oppression. It's a mixed bag.
Well, when you have a tyrannical government or an authoritarian, then you make them at fault and they have to fix things. Whereas if you kind of have this representative democracy, it's like nobody's fault in particular. And so there's a lot of passing of the buck. And, we've really got to break down into regions and even more than cities, is that you have to govern this area all together. And like I think we were talking before of like, who gets the tax base and who doesn't, who needs the services. I mean, Monterey County, if you took it as one entity and you pooled all the property taxes to provide for the county, then Chugar and Soledad and those places would get more services rather than.
Are they part of Monterey County?
Yeah, it goes
Yeah.
all the way to the Pinnacles
Oh,
and goes all the way down to it splits Nacimiento and the other lake.
So, one thing that was interesting that happened during the pandemic in terms of housing and resources being allocated. So, we had a lot of hotels that were being contracted as semi-permanent housing for people who had been chronically homeless or people who had been affected by COVID. And we're seeing programs where they're being allocated $4,000 a month per unit. And with that, they are expecting these hotels to run as if they are social service programs. So you're expecting them to do room checks because to qualify for these programs and to qualify under chronic homelessness, you have to meet certain ideas. So you have to be handicapped, dealing with mental disability, physical disability, or substance abuse. Oftentimes, you find all of these populations housed under one program, which is also problematic because if you have someone who is, escaping a domestic violence situation and they are a family and they have children, and then you put them in the same program where people are trying to better themselves and are struggling with substance abuse, well, that person may have gotten clean, but now perhaps the overly stressed parent who is coming out of this deep, dark depression of physical violence now has access to those drugs, or people who have mental health disorders who are self-treating, because also we don't talk about the lack of access to healthcare and to medical professionals. If you tell somebody who is in pain that they have to wait 3 months to see someone, well, you can bet that they're going to find some way to manage that pain on their own, and a lot of that ends up turning into a even further more debilitating substance abuse problem. So you have all of these cross issues happening under the umbrella of staff that is not trained to deal with that population, who are more than likely going to, of course, accept the contract because it's a lot of money and it's a lot of people, but who are then not going to actually hire the staff required to meet those requirements of checking on people, doing room checks, providing laundry soap, providing other rideshare services. So it looks good on paper, but it's the execution. So who is regulating? And that's been a huge problem. I worked within the housing, so I worked with Santa Clara County, and I had worked for Abode Services, which started off as a religious and Christian housing relief program that expanded, and now they are like through 7 different counties, and they had similar issues, putting all of these different populations under one roof. We would have so many deaths in every single building, every single program, because you have a bare bones staff. So if you have like one actual clinical person who can actually diagnose and connect you to services, and then maybe you have a couple social workers whose job is to actually train people to live indoors, because a lot of these people, if you're meeting the requirements for chronic homelessness, you've been outdoors for years. And you've been put into a lottery system and your name has been picked, and now finally you get the opportunity to be housed. And the goal is to get funding And in order to keep your funding, you have to do X, Y, Z. And so you have to teach people what it means to live indoors. So maybe they haven't had to deal with the fact that now they can actually buy food and refrigerate it. So now you have to educate what needs to be refrigerated, what doesn't. How your toilets are actually working and functioning. How to manage your electricity bills, because now you're expecting all these people who have lived with the freedoms of just doing their own thing outdoors to adhere to, okay, well, now here's lights out, here's quiet time, here's how you operate in this communal space. So there's just a lot that goes into that, and we don't resource.
They're going
well
straight from Paleolithic to Neolithic.
Yeah.
They're making like the human transition into housing.
And then it's also, okay, so the, take it or leave it contract, which is you will adhere to this or you'll just be on the streets again. So we threaten people a lot with that, just as a nation, which is gross. We're not as advanced or elevated as we'd like to think that we are with these programs. It looks good on the county that they can say, oh yeah, we've spent this much money and we gave it to this program. And I was like, okay, but who's regulating that program? And then if you have individuals who have been in the system for X amount of time, like you allocate who's worth spending on. So for instance, because you're still expected to pay rent once you get into these programs, and they will usually base it off of whatever income, if you have like Medi-Cal, whatever is happening for your GA, whatever your assistance is, they'll say, okay, so maybe this person's housing will only cost $50 a month, but this person, they actually got a job, it's going to be $300. Well, this person, they're making X amount, it's going to be $700. So you have all of these different varying prices for the same living conditions, which is also kind of wild. And then if a person loses their job, it's very difficult to be like, oh, okay, so now we have to get you back on GA, and now your rent is just going to be $500 again. And then a lot of people, they just stop paying. And so then we go to county and say, hey, they have this debt. We need to pay the housing people their rent money. Can you just wipe the slate? And well, they say, okay, well, then let's look at the person. And then they start going through, and then it's really interesting to see what metrics they use to decide whether or not you're worth the second chance, whether or not you're worth the third chance, whether or not you're worth the fourth chance. And oftentimes when you have people that are just like running in the rat race of this system, you get a few individuals who really understand how to work the system and who are just like, okay, so this is what I can get away with. Here's the dollar amount of damages that I can do. Oh, I can go into this unit, strip this out, sell this refrigerator, sell this, blah, 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 make this money. And I don't really need the housing. Like, I'll just make the money and go. And then you have other individuals where it's just a literal case of this was just not the facility for them. They were not mentally prepared to live alone in this way. They've gone from living essentially in a pack and to extreme isolation, which can be devastating for people. We had talked earlier about the fact that we're no longer even parenting with the same community aspect. But we are also not living in the same community aspect. We're not supposed to be one person trying to figure everything out on their own. Mm-hmm. Who do you turn to?
Isolation isn't natural, and humans don't thrive in an isolated setting. I mean, that's been proven scientifically over and over again. So it sounds like it's kind of for many individuals, it's structured to fail.
Yeah, they've done a lot of studies on presenting these problems to the public. And they show that if they tell an individual story of someone who's on hard times, people will reach the conclusion that the person brought it on themselves. Mm-hmm. But if you tell it from the general view of the structure and stuff like that, people then say, okay, we have to act on this because it's not their particular person's fault. So, the housing situation is that I believe in private property. I think everyone should have some. And I think we live in a system that doesn't believe in private property because it's going to be the mass majority that doesn't have any. So that obviously is not a system that believes in private property.
Well, Monterey is already, the majority of Monterey are renters.
Right. I think everyone should have some private property. That's how much I believe in private property. And I don't think that the people who are like, "Yeah, what about private property?" are just like, I want to amass so much to the detriment of the future. I mean, I'm looking for like, how are we socially going to lift our morale to accomplish these things? And what's going to, like, the idea that we need the moral equivalent of war to all come together. And my thing is that we have intergenerational responsibilities, and we have to sacrifice for the future to come into existence. We have to give more than we get. That's how we build a surplus for them to thrive on. But we are centered on a core philosophy of profit in which we get more than we give. And that is an extinction cult. That is going to bring about the end of humanity because of this artificial number system where there's old men out there who just want to see how much everything adds up to, and that if they could get that higher, then they don't even need it. And they're depriving their children and grandchildren, or even if they don't have children, they're depriving the species' future of this. And I don't know how to get that mentality, because they don't realize how socially sadistic their greed is.
I have a question for Kylie.
Yeah.
I heard this saying, like, people are not living on the street, they're dying on the street. Would you agree with that? You have a lot more expertise in housing the homeless and those unique challenges to that population. How dangerous? I mean, how mortally dangerous is it to be homeless?
Extremely. So that's another, thank you for the question. That's another take that I get faced with all the time, of people wanting to tell me that it's hyperbole. And I was like, no, when you have someone who is literally cut off from all resources, it's so, like, death is very attainable. It's very easy for human beings to die. From starvation, from infection, from violence. So when you're on the street, sure, and it also depends just on the weather where you are. I used to joke all the time. It was like when I lived in Hawaii, I was like, oh, yes. You can always tell when winter is coming because they will fly homeless individuals out to tropical areas or to areas where it's warm, to deserts. They literally clean up the streets because they don't want the death rates affecting their margins and affecting their hospitals, and they don't want people flooding into spaces and taking up beds. And so they're like, oh, we'll just send them to someplace warmer. So no, death is an immediate concern. And also, just because substance abuse is so high, your options when you are, deep in your addiction, it's jails, institutions, and death. And it's not something that is some cerebral thought. No, this is a very real situation. I've had friends who travel. It's like the dirty kids. They're living on the fringe of the system. They're nomadic, which is also interesting how we have phrases for people who do have jobs, but they're just working afar, and they're able to maintain a certain level. Or you have people who are living out of their cars, going to work, showering at work, and they're able to maintain, but they also have some form of shelter. Being actually shelterless, living under an underpass is so dangerous. The dangers you face from the moral implications of someone literally being like, your life is worth less, so I can take advantage of you. The amount of people that get beaten on the street, the amount of people who die from eating bad food because they're eating out of trash cans, the amount of people who die due to the weather, because it's cold or because they're in an area that flooded and they had no resources. It's very real. Fentanyl has wiped out and hit this county so hard that now, and it's always the conversation of, oh yes, it's only important when it starts reaching, upper middle class white kids. And now you're seeing deaths from fentanyl in Carmel, and now it's reaching more of a mainstream conversation. But we just had like the head of police in San Jose, a white woman, arrested because she had been distributing fentanyl for years. And the idea of who is the distributor of these drugs, who's responsible for bringing these drugs into this country, and it always gets blamed on immigrant and migrant workers.
Right.
And we're like, no, it was this very wealthy white woman in a position of power, in defunding the police, abolishing the police. I don't understand the idea of people being like, oh, well, if only they had more training and more funding. How much more training do you need to know that it is wrong for you to kneel on the neck of someone until they die? How much more training do you need? Because I have literally seen this working with homeless populations in San Jose, of doing sweeps of people who had managed to work themselves up to buying a trailer, to buying an RV. Now that is their home. And it may not function or move as often, but because now you think it's ugly because they're having to package things on top, or you think it's an eyesore, now you're coming through and you come at the most inopportune time. You kick them out, you give them parking citations, you tow that vehicle to a lot, and you do it where it's like, okay, so the lot is going to charge $300 to $500 to get your vehicle out. Maybe you do this at 4 o'clock, so they have to come down to the station to fill out the forms. They now are having to leave that in the lot overnight. So now you've just taken all of their belongings. Are they going to be able to have the resources to come up with that amount of money overnight? And if they don't, well, then now they're charged with littering and with obstructing justice. We've had people be arrested literally for asking questions about why their items are being taken. Oh, and they're like, oh, well, now you're resisting arrest, or you're disturbing the peace. And we see this time and time again, people being brutalized because they don't have anyone to advocate for them. And it's so easy for us to distance ourselves and say, that could never be me. Like, yes, it could. Yes, it can. I've been stopped here in Monterey, right outside the Paris Bakery. A police officer, and it's like, you're driving while black is really what it was, because, he came up to me, he was like, oh, your windows are tinted. My windows were rolled down. I was at a stop sign. I was parked. He's like, you don't have your seatbelt. I was like, I'm parked. I'm getting out of my car. I'm going to pick up a birthday cake. Oh, whose birthday? Where do you live? What are you doing around here?
Wow.
And I was like, I live here. Like, do you live here? I was like, yeah, like I actually own a home here. Oh, you own a home? How did you manage that?
Wow.
What? And I was just like, I don't actually have to answer any of these questions. Is this a traffic stop? What's going on here? And I'm listening to his radio, and he's getting a call that there's like a break-in that's happening right down the street. And I was like, so you're not going to answer that? You would really rather sit here and question me about a birthday cake and some donuts that I'm going to go pick up, rather than answer a call where someone is actually needing help.
Right. So that's where a social worker responding immediately, who's trained in de-escalation, might be a more appropriate pairing than a law enforcement officer.
Or just social workers cruising around looking to help, rather than someone whose go-to is to make your life so much worse.
And
where's his, he doesn't even, it's not even in his tool belt to help. He isn't there going, hey, that's, just, everything you're saying is amazing and so right on.
But what he's doing with Kylie is he's enforcing segregation, is really what he's doing.
Right.
In that moment, he's saying, you're at Paris Bakery.
You'll be scrutinized.
You're going to be scrutinized for picking up a birthday cake. Why don't you head over to Seaside? I mean, that's what,
right.
That's
like,
harassment.
Oh, you live in Seaside? Like, what are you doing in Monterey? And I'm just like,
yeah.
I live here, but also, like, I was born here. I have family here. But what got me the most about that story is not that I was stopped, because I expect that. I've had these experiences. I was arrested at 12 in Marina, put in the back of a cop car because I was in a store, and another child had stolen candy. I had my receipts in my pocket. I didn't even know this other kid, but I was arrested as an accomplice. because I couldn't answer the questions that they were asking me about who that other individual was. I was like, I don't know. I have my receipt. We're not related. They put me in the back of the car. They took me to the police station, which was like right around the corner, and I sat in a cell by myself for hours before they would even let me call someone at
That's
12.
so scary and traumatic.
And so, like, these are the experiences that I've had personally. And so it's like, it's not new. We just are able to record now. And we are able to have the camera, the dash cams, the body cams. I think we are becoming a little more educated collectively on what our rights are. So
Transparency.
transparency.
I mean, everybody. We like. I think that I was talking about how money isn't a private possession; it's a public good because it's only valuable in relation to other people. I don't think there should be any privacy when it comes to money. I think that I understand the call for privacy of like I want to be able to do what I want to do, but bad things happen in secrecy. And you can't allow, if you're going to use money, then it has to be where everybody checks. We just have to change the money culture on how this works. But like this civil rights movement is transparency
And
accountability,
because it was the accountability part, because I did the follow-up, which was, you do what you're supposed to do, you report an incident. So I called to report the incident,
Oh, good.
but the chief who answered, I know that officer. I've known them for 40 years. They're not racist. They wouldn't do that. I'm sure there was another reason. And then did not take my report. Just refused to take it. And I was like, what?
When we
So no
when we were,
accountability.
no accountability.
when we were in Spain, we noticed that there's no male officers alone; that they have to have a female companion.
Also in Mexico.
In Mexico, too.
Police officers are a man and a woman always together.
I agree. I'm noticing a trend. Men can't be left alone. Don't leave them alone. Y'all need some people. That's why there's double women. Y'all need escorts. You need some.
Chaperone. They need to be chaperones. I think.
Yeah, everybody needs to be chaperoned. Even a female cop needs another person there.
Yes, no, this is very true.
Right, because the police officer is in a position in which is we're supposed to have a checks and balance system, and they have the ability to arbitrarily enforce and not enforce. Because we all know that, like, when you're in the moment, that police officer is going to decide if you're in the system or you walk away, and it was all a close call. And that's a lot of power to put in one person who is bringing their lack of dinner, sleep, their divorce, or whatever their experiences are, their upbringing, rather
how much
than
steroids they're on.
right, having someone to cross-reference. And they should be looking to help. I mean, it's the attitude of like, I'm here to protect and serve, rather than I am here to look for somebody doing something wrong and get them,
I will say that I have had positive experiences, shock, awe, believe me, I'm just as surprised, where, I had an instance of somebody utilizing their privilege to target me, and officers were able to see through that situation and call them out on it. So I was like, Seaside Police Department does have, which is like, a few good eggs, a few good apples. It's terrible. Who were able to, in the moment, be like, you're being ridiculous. Clearly I'm not seeing that this person is a threat, is a danger. But I've also experienced that of people using, police officers and weaponizing their privilege against people of color because they understand very clearly that the threat is real. If you call the police on me, that they are most likely going to immediately associate me with having done wrong. And I've also had the flip side experience of where there was a situation where I did have to call officers and then immediately had to prove, yes, I was the one who called. This is why I'm calling. And like having that run constantly in the back of your mind of, people understanding that you are probably not going to call the police. So then how do you want to move forward? How do you want to deal with that? Are you going to immediately instigate violence, which I think is also why BIPOC communities get so tied with violence. And it's not necessarily that they're violent, but that we have to be self-regulating, because police officers are not going to regulate and they're not going to solve the problem. And so then it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't mentality.
And that makes you really vulnerable. That puts you in a vulnerable. Well, just not counterpoint, but point for point, I would say that Jimmy is always treated so amazing by the police. And I would say that more than half the time, we don't get pulled over often, but when we've been pulled over, they just let us go.
Yes.
More than half the time.
I passed the pigment test. We crossed the border quite a bit, and it's amazing that, what I say is taken. And then we've had our African-American friend be in the car with us, and we get pulled over to secondary. Yeah. So, I mean, how, and it happened twice. So it's like it wasn't a fluke, and we'd never been pulled over to secondary. And then I'm just like, wow, Border Patrol might be racist.
Might be.
Oh.
And then that's the other thing is that do we want to have these jobs that people want? Or do we want to have it where, as public service, you rotate through? And, one of the reasons in England was that the bobbies, they don't carry guns. So if you were ever to kill a police officer or hurt a police officer, it was your fault because everybody knew they don't have guns. And that's why it would be kind of nice if that our police officers were like, they got randomly picked out of our society that they have to do a year here. So they're not even they're not there for what the culture of, and that's, we're talking structure, is that it's the way things are structured. This is the outcome. So obviously the structure has to change, but the structure's political, and the political system and the media, like commercial media, can never advocate. It can never organize us. You're never going to get CNN or anybody like that saying, this is a piece of legislation we should get behind and pass, because that would violate their sponsors' interests. And so there's nobody on TV and nobody in the media, I mean, very few, that are looking to organize us to change things. Everybody else is invested in the status quo. And our communities, how are we going to break down? Because you need a community council, and we know even in Mexico, if somebody's acting up, you don't phone the police, you phone their mother. And their mother phones their aunt and their wife, and everybody shows up, and a group of women come, and if there's a guy acting out, he is all of a sudden surrounded by all the women who feed him, raised him, and even the guy that is out there on drugs can pull it together with those eyes on him, But again, the middle class meant not only financial resources, it meant time. Like, people don't even have time for vacations anymore. That people, like you said, the barbershop quartet that goes pro was guys who got off work. There used to be a thing called garage workshops, and they don't even have that anymore. I mean, I'm for like getting rid of the automobile in the suburbs. Like, they should have a parking lot outside the suburbs, and then everybody has to walk to their home, and then. Because let's do an inventory of society. Like, what do we as the public own? We own the roads, so the roads can be repurposed. If we start digging up the roads, that's a lot of real estate in between all the neighborhoods that could be used for play space, amphitheaters, public baths. And you wouldn't even believe how exciting it would be if, on the most beautiful summer night, there's a bonfire out there and everyone who has guitar or instruments goes around and plays. But we don't have a society that facilitates that kind of social interaction. And that's why we don't know what's missing. Like, like if a thief comes in your house and steals something, they know what they got, but you walk in and you don't notice. And that's what's happening is we keep being born into a society that is losing the civic equipment, losing the community halls, losing a culture, just a cultural, like what we do. Like we all meet on Fridays outside in good weather.
Well, I remember our kids were the last kids to get music lessons in elementary school. And then our kids were the last kids to be in band at Colton Junior High. And so we saw the programs being closed the doors were being closed right behind our kids, you know. And so for kids being born today, I think their ability to become musicians.
They don't even know what's missing.
They don't know what's missing. Yeah.
Yeah, we were in Monterey raising our children in the 1990s. And between 1995 and 2001, Monterey, the city of Monterey, lost 5,000 out of 15,000 students. And so the school started contracting because they found teachers living in their cars because the housing prices had already become middle class was gone. And so they closed. They started to do K through 8. We would go to teacher meetings, and the teachers were crying, and it was all because of home prices. It was all because of my landlord going, "But my friend's getting $2,100 a month for 3 bedrooms, and you're only paying $1,800." And I'm like, "But as a percentage, but that's all he could see." And so I would love this rental registry to put how much is the carrying cost of a rental and how much they're charging. I want to give an award to who's making the most per month on their renters. I want that person to I want that to be on the front of the page of the paper is like, "Oh my God, this guy is gouging people." I mean, he pays nothing. He's under Prop 13 and he paid off his house and he's getting this much a month. Let's hold him up because he is what everybody should be.
Well, what won't be a house. It'll be an apartment complex, the person who's making the most money.
Right, but he should want to be known. He should do victory laps. I mean, he goes home and he looks how much money he's got. We got to get him outside so that we can all celebrate him.
Give him a homeless award.
Yeah, is that, you're such you're so incredible. You were born at the right time. You bought a house at the right time. I mean, they don't even realize how their success was so circumstantial. And they think that it was all about them because, I mean, toxic narcissism is what is the height of Americanism.
Goes really well it's a good pairing with capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it just, it elevates this personality. Adam Smith said that the invisible hand was shame, was that it was people knowing that would govern he said, beware the domineering personality. That's how Adam Smith was a moral philosopher who came up with a money system that he thought would bring about the greater good. But he said, look, there's personalities that'll utilize it. He said corporations were going to be a problem because they don't care about life. They just care about profit. And so they'll kill everybody to make more money. And that's why we have the war machine. I mean, they're killing people to make more money. And everybody believes, Emerson had a great quote. He says that, everybody does their job and no one feels responsible for the outcome of it all.
But you're imagining this greedy Mr. Scrooge who is just profiting off the backs of all of his renters. And the truth is that it's going to be
Coca-Cola. It's going to be
I was like, it's Coachella.
No.
You know what I mean? No, it's I think about, because it's if we're moving forward and the generations of younger people, the trust fund babies, the Trustafarians, these people who are able to just travel the world and not have to think about where their money is coming from or bills or anything like that. And the things that they spend time on and money on is just why are we, really using status symbols in this way of luxury, virtue signaling. It's like, okay, so I'm going to go to this concert and it's going to look good on paper that I'm supporting women or that I'm supporting gay rights, but like, what is your actual activism? Other than like a sticker, or for somebody to say like, oh hey, I see that you're like accepting, but like on paper, who are you supporting? And it's really interesting to find that philanthropy, the most philanthropic people are people who understand what it is to not have your needs met. People who have gone hungry are the most willing to feed other people. And the idea that we have such large extremes of individuals who are trying to maintain a certain image of being healthy, the image of being healthy without actually being healthy. It's like, so to maintain this image, like you're not eating, you're getting surgeries, you're nipping, tucking, dyeing, plucking, all to adhere to a standard that isn't occurring in nature. And then you want to apply desirability politics on top of that, and then completely just destroy the relationships that we have even within ourselves. It becomes a really dangerous cycle of people who then have shame now, like, oh, I can't believe, it's not leaving room for growth as well, right? It's like, okay, so if you did live this extravagant, exorbitant life, is shame going to be enough to turn you around? And if it is, then how do you face all the people that you literally know that had to be trampled in order for you to live the life that you live? So I don't know.
It's a lot of cognitive dissonance to face that shame.
Yeah, it's new measuring sticks. Like, what does it mean to be a good person? And there's a measuring stick. It's taking others into consideration. What does it mean to be socially successful? It means that you are involved with your community. You know what I mean? So the measuring sticks we have right now in this extreme individualism are like, do I look good? Have I bond there? Whatever. But there's non-material wealth that comes. We all want to be part of something greater than ourselves, and it takes more than ourselves to do that. And, I think that we're looking at saving humanity from itself. And I think this is the hardest thing that human beings in our whole trajectory. It's been really interesting. We've been doing a lot of study of Neolithic and Paleolithic and into the Bronze Age and all that. And human beings have been on this trek not that long. I mean, you go back 2,000, 3,000 years, and it basically looks like they were thinking like us. They had a different... They still have the same community needs.
Well, they just came up with the alphabet not that long ago. And, Socrates was out there going, oh, no, it's just going to turn the young people's minds to mush if they can just read and write stuff down. They won't remember. They won't have oral histories. And then we got the alphabet. That was the first, weakening of the human mind, and then we're going for the next.
But then we became book smart,
and then
right, and now we've got and now it's amazing when you go, I'll Google that, and other people aren't Googling. I mean,
okay, so Google as a tool, you do have to know, because I do love when people are like, oh yes, I researched this topic, and I was like, did you research it, or did you Google it, and do you know the difference between a peer-reviewed paper
and an ad,
journal, an ad,
a sponsored ad?
Do you know how to, and it's the critical thinking, I think, and you wrote a book about critical thinking, so I'd love to have your take on that, but the lapse of critical thinking in our education, because access to knowledge does not necessarily equate to intellect. So if I can Google something and tell you a factoid, but I don't have the comprehension skills to actually understand whether or not what I'm reading is biased, the time that it was written, whose perspective it's from, who is supposed to be supported by this information. If I don't have the wherewithal or the processing power to actually expand beyond the literal interpretation of what's on the paper, well, then it's a loss, right? And so, how do we bridge that gap as well? Like, that's a good one.
Yeah, because when you Google, you look and you see that all the top ones are ads, and then you go down and you see the way they framed whatever it is that you're looking for, and you say, oh, this is biased, and then you look at the sources of what page it's coming from or who said it. And so, I mean, there is a skill in Googling that you do develop. One of the things that made humanity where we're at is that we cross-reference with each other. And it's called intersubjectivity. And so that's the
vibe check.
Right.
It's the vibe check. Did you pass the vibe check? I'm like,
Right. And that's the scientific method, is that can it be peer reviewed and can they replicate your results? But the thing is that group insanity is self-supporting. Because you start turn to the person next to you, go, am I crazy? And if they're crazy as you are, they say, no, you're not crazy. And then, but I also see that, when I read, I learn through my eyes, and I have an inner voice inside that's speaking the words to me. But when I watch audio visual, I'm getting the information through my ears and I'm watching, and it's a different way of incorporating the information. So I find that I remember what I read in more detail than what I saw. So I do a thing called Wikipedia deep dives, and I go on Wikipedia and then I just start cross-referencing with all the see alsos and all that, and I actually copy and paste the parts that I really like, and then I get them printed into books that I read. But there's other people who are watching YouTube videos, and we've already seen that if you are into self-help or into exercise,
yoga,
that they try to get you with aliens are coming, and I mean they have these sponsored ads, and again, people don't have the skill to avoid them being targeted.
Well, I looked up an ancient Neolithic village in Turkey because we were in Turkey at the ancient Neolithic village, and so I Googled it and I got a video, and it seemed somewhat okay for a few seconds. And it gets into the village was built by aliens. So because I clicked on that video to know more about the place where we were traveling,
oh no,
I was then for a month inundated with
the algorithm. The algorithm got you?
Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all of them thought I wanted to know about aliens.
Do you not want to know about the aliens, though?
I don't want to know about the aliens.
I do think it's also, sidebar, hilarious that all of these ancient civilizations were so much more advanced in their understanding of mathematics and our literal position in the galaxy and the study of the stars and being able to move in a 3D way, living so in tune with nature and having an understanding that we are not able to replicate today, and so then it's automatically aliens did that. And I was like, okay, so this is classic erasure of communities of color because you didn't understand. I don't understand how they did this. It must be magic. It must be mysticism. Kill the witches, burn them at the stake, get rid of it all. Just the money. I'll pay you to build this thing because I don't know how to build it myself. But also, you must be in league with Satan to have constructed such a beautiful mathematical artifact.
Well, just recently, Enheduanna is a Sumerian princess, and she wrote in the first person. Very first person to write an autobiographical, because I've been studying the alphabet and symbols and stuff like that. And that was discovered in 1928. And they said, no, scribes were male, so somebody probably did it as her name and stuff like that. And it's taken 100 years now for them to finally come out and say the very first person to write autobiographically was a woman. So
1,500 years before Homer.
Yeah, before
Yes,
Homer.
I remember researching her and seeing why she was inspired to write from her father's historical conquering of lands and the actual mistrust of her leadership because she was a woman, and mistrust of her ability to be a scholar and to actually lead people because of her sex, and the fact that she had to write it herself because male scribes would not take her story. Do it yourself.
Right, and then her temple of whoever she was honoring is where scribes were educated, and that was her place. And she was, and they actually have statues of her with a pen in her hand, or whatever they had at that time, and
writing on a
and male
cuneiform tablet.
male archaeologists for the last 100 years are like, we don't know what she's doing. But and then to like jockey that into like contemporary, I ask women who are older than me, I always go, who was your female hero growing up? And it's an amazing question because women weren't allowed to really have heroes. So I meet women in their 80s and they'll say, oh, Eleanor Roosevelt. They have one. Women younger than that are like, oh, Jackie O. And women younger than that now are hip and they're like Jane Fonda, right? But
That's what the hip young kids we know are doing.
I was like, really, Jane Fonda? I was
No,
like, Angela Davis.
I'm saying anybody older than me. So that's
Okay.
This is who I'm targeting. But the thing is that women came up with great answers of like, there were more women I didn't want to be like than more women I idolized. And as a boy, Rod Carew, Nate Archibald, I mean, I had my sports heroes, I had, all these different heroes, and yet women were being told that's the kind of woman you don't want to be like, rather than, you know what I mean? And that's like, we're talking.
Oh, I idolized the Bionic Woman and in the 70s, and her skill was that she could clean house really fast. She could put on her bionic skills.
Stop.
And she could clean a house so
She's like,
fast.
I'm an electrical engineer. I have designed these jets. Why? So I can keep my Jetson happy.
Somehow the Bionic Woman, like the storyline, always came down to that somebody was coming over and she had to clean really fast.
Stop.
Occasionally I would watch on the edge of my seat, and occasionally she'd like jump over a building and I'd be like, yes. But yeah, a lot of cleaning. It was very demoralizing. So who were the female heroes that you were allowed to have?
I guess I just came up in an amazing generation because I was like Serena Williams,
Wow.
Angela Davis, Ruby Bridges, who's still alive today. People keep talking about segregation in the South as if it is long, long, long past history. Ruby Bridges is in her 60s. She's like around my mom's age. So for all of the discussion around, racism in America, that's ridiculous.
Well, the Frederick Douglass contemporary, and I mean, it's, and the TV, the commercial media has proven that it's not capable of creating an educated, informed audience that can carry on representative democracy. So as a good manager, you never give somebody a job they can't do. And the commercial media has proven that it's incapable of running or incapable of just creating a society that is capable of running an honest government and all this stuff. And so that's why, like, we're public access right now. Everybody who's delivering the news represents their sponsors. So the only way for us to get news in our interest is if we sponsor it.
Yeah, I was going to say, who's sponsoring today? Who's sponsoring us today?
Yeah, we are.
We are.
We are.
It's us. We are the world.
We are sponsored by Tie-Dyes.
Right,
We
but
are the children.
so where is the revenue stream that could sponsor public media? Well, the largest untaxed revenue stream in the U.S. economy is advertisement revenues. And
What?
right
You
now,
mean advertising isn't taxed?
right
That's
now,
outrageous.
I know. Right now, when a corporation buys airtime from a broadcast company, like imagine the Super Bowl, they pay no sales tax on that transaction. And a 5% sales tax would raise over $10 billion a year. That could go for community access, TV, and radio. And the commercial media realizes that you just watch one channel at a time. So if all of a sudden you start watching community TV, that takes you off the commercial media. But what if we have regional flair? What if we have our bands start playing, our local artisans, our local businesses? I mean, we have to have our own media, and this is dying right here. They're like going to try to take away public access right now. The cable companies are trying to get out of their franchise fees that go towards this, and we need more of this, not less.
So I think it's very interesting, the idea that you can only consume one channel at a time, because I'm finding that that is not the case with our generation. We, or at least my generation, having been diagnosed with ADHD, all of the, we were finding so many more people are on the spectrum, and we have multiple screens. I don't know a single person that is my age whose setup is not 3 screens at least. We're refurbishing laptops if we can find them, even though people are under resourced. They're dumpster diving and finding people that will chuck out because of the way that our technology advances. If you have an Apple computer and they come out with the next thing, well, you're going to go rush and find the next one. So you get all of this old technology that is just out here floating. People pick them up. They know how to refurbish. To a certain extent, you can hack into things. Hack the world is becoming more and more common. So you do have the setup of the person who has their gamer chair, 4 or 5 screens. They're all playing different things, a virtual setup, and they're just toggling back and forth. And we're finding, I really think that's interesting. We're of like, oh, it's an attention deficit. And I was like, well, if you're actually able to process all of these things at once and then come up with a collective solution, then it seems like that is an evolutionary step.
Exactly.
And not necessarily like a diagnosis of something gone wrong. I was like, this was inevitable. If you start putting multiple streams of information, we are highly adaptive as human beings. And even the way our eyes function, we're finding more and more faster streamlining things that are going on with human beings, even on a genetic level, that now we just have the technology to be able to talk about how much we didn't really understand about genomes, how much we didn't understand about DNA manipulation, and we're at a point now where we can do these things and screen. So we're having access to screens even in the womb. It's really interesting. So it's like,
And evolution is that quick.
And
I
it's
mean,
very
it will
quick.
really, it'll divide our mind into the new medium. We have a new dominant medium. And it's nice that the younger generations are teaching themselves how to master the new dominant medium, because the older generations grew up with a dominant medium that was a one-way communication. So their TV just shouted at them and they could never shout back. So now with the interaction, there's going to be an evolution for sure.
So what do you see? What do you see is maybe the next step in communication, public communication?
So I think we are now at a step where communication is going to be global. We have VPN. We have ways to bypass the blockages that countries try to put up. You look at how people are protesting, and you look at what the immediate steps are with a nation that's protesting, and it's to shut down lines of communication. Well, now we're at a point where people can build their own hubs for internet. So how are you going to monitor that? People can, they have programs that already exist to make it look like your computer has an IP address that's actually in China, so you can have access to the Chinese networks and the Chinese television, Chinese TikTok. And it's really interesting now because people are assessing, observing, and reporting,
Comparing,
back, and
right?
comparing the differences. Why is TikTok in this nation all education based and only based on dances here? Why are women being taken off the street and murdered for showing their hair and not wearing a hijab, and women here can wear mini skirts and go to work? The collectivism is going to happen. We are at a point where it's now the physical body is becoming irrelevant. People are interacting more with avatars, creating what you want to be perceived at in your mental space. Because we're recognizing if I'm going to connect and talk to somebody who's all the way across the world, I'm not probably not going to see them physically ever. So why do they care what I look like if we're actually having a mental dialogue and a mental relationship where we can support each other in that way? So I think it's going to get to a point where we are going to be extremely global in terms of our communication. We are going to have satellite access to everything in the world. And I think it's going to be, this division is probably going to be eliminated because it is an us problem, a we, us, them issue. Why are we spending the same resources over and over and over again? I think space travel is a prime example of this. Why does every nation need separate satellites? Why are we all sending up separate? We're wasting fuel. We know that we only have a finite amount. We're burning holes in the ozone. We know that this is a collective issue. Collectively, we all need to breathe. Collectively, we all need clean water to drink. So I think we have to get to a point where we can say, this is damaging to every single person. And I think there are pathways there. And I think people are starting to have those conversations. And I think that's just where we're going to be. Like, we're going to have to rely on each other.
Yes, it's going to become necessity. These are the changes that have to happen for survival.
And they're being raised this way. I mean, there is a generation gap because there was a medium. I mean, the 1960s, those children were the first children to be raised on TV. And they called, there's this generation gap. Well, now we have the internet. And that is creating another generation gap. So I'm really enthralled with that you already have the worldview and the mindset that's coming into being. And basically, there's generations who aren't flexible, or they weren't raised to do this. Like,
right. So here, like, I'm a very positive person, right? And I say, okay, so like, here's what we could do to build forward. That is coming from the standpoint of believing that we have a future. That is coming from the standpoint of believing that we are able to do the work to undo some of the damage. This is coming from, somebody who is willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears to restore things. And I have done that. And that is the bootstrap mentality, right? The flip side of that is that you have individuals who truly are saying, well, if you look at the trajectory, wouldn't it be easier or more self-serving to just eradicate 1/3 of the population? Wouldn't it just be easier to just wipe such and such country off the map because they're poor, they're not contributing? And then again, when you look at those mindsets, I'm like, okay, so you want to eradicate the people, but you want to keep the land because the land has the resources. And then you want to use those resources to benefit your people.
And just do it again.
But then also, if you eradicate the people that are there, well, then who's going to go get the resources? So now then you've done the same thing to your population. Now you've enslaved your own population. So where does that end? That is a dead end, a literal dead end. The nuclear war solution of we all die. Game over. And I'm faced with those types of conversations all the time. I was listening to a friend talk about the, I don't know if you're familiar with like the dark web, the 4chan.
I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
I'm glad you don't. It's
Okay.
gross. So just like everything, of people having the, dark night of the soul and people being unregulated and people using violence and the tools of war, death and destruction and fear mongering to control populations, it's not new. But what you do have now is more access to it. And I remember, so this was probably like middle school when we were starting to see all the beheadings online before they were regulated. So I remember being in a room and being the oldest child in a room telling someone, you should not let your brothers and sisters, these elementary school kids, watch these videos, these decapitations. Like, this is a real life that is being taken. And when you're so young, you don't have the ability to recognize what's real and what isn't necessarily, and it becomes so commonplace. So we intake this, and it becomes normal. And I've heard the argument of, well, that's a very feminine point of view. That's a very soft point of view that like murder shouldn't be just like running rampant and regular consumption for entertainment. I think there's also a separation of what we consume as entertainment and what we consume to be knowledgeable and to be aware and to understand when we need to take steps and actions and put, legislation into place, regulations. We already know that people left unchecked and under-resourced will do vile and ugly and nihilistic things. We perpetuate these images so that becomes part of a collective as an option. Because I don't think we would look at comic books. You wouldn't have such a strive for heroes who are able to negate and thrive off of nuclear energy if we didn't already recognize that this was a problem. So it is an issue of power and devaluing of life in general. What value does a human life have if it's not your own personal life? That whole conversation of, it's repression when it happens to you, it's depression when it happens to me, and the lack of empathy. We talk about, sociopaths, psychopaths, what's happening in our collective mental health. And when people don't see a way out, when people have felt that they are now not even just having to deal with the current day trauma, but the historical collective trauma of the human race, because we have access to the knowledge of what happened and we can see it in perfect detail. And I think we have a generation now of people who are on the spectrum who are highly empathetic and highly feeling. And when you expose individuals like that to all of this information about 4chan, all of the atrocities that we have done throughout wars and genocide, it's really easy to become hyper fixated on that aspect of humanity and miss out on everything else that is the flip side of that yin and yang, which is the growth, the civilization, the reconnection, the restoration, and the healing. So it's like these things must go hand in hand. So if you're going to have a dark web, you must then also have a light web, and then in between a gray web. And that is just, that is the nature of the universe. We are perpetually cycling. And so I think we are deep in a cycle of just all of the darkness, and who profits off of that and who gets to live in a false sense of, lightness and purity. I think these concepts come across so clearly when I look at the racial problems here in the United States. The idea of white guilt and white tears and the coddling of do not share your trauma because now you're inflicting pain by telling your story. You're giving secondary trauma to somebody who was living in a perfect bubble of bliss, unaware, and now they're suffering. Now they have depression. Now they're empathetic to your existence. And that is a bad thing. Keep your trauma and your drama to yourself. Don't talk about it.
Like the
and
phrase,
in fact, just go away. Like it'd be better if maybe you just died and everybody else could just continue living.
yeah, don't trauma dump. That's the phrase, right? Trauma dumping.
And there's doom scrolling.
Scrolling.
Yeah, people.
What exactly is doom scrolling?
Doom scrolling is literally the access to all of the information and all the bad crap that's happening 24/7. So we were talking about the housing crisis here in the United States, right? Again, first world country problems, first world nation problems. If you are now having access to what the housing crises are like everywhere throughout the world, and you're seeing people literally building their thatched tin hut roofs, and then you see people who are working in sweat factories, the people who are making your sneakers that you can now affordably buy at Walmart, who are getting paid pennies. You're now being able to see what their lives actually look like. People who are literally living on top of each other, having to live with strangers in the same units. People who are living out of like bunk beds and cooking out of a hot pot, and all of their whole life is in one square unit. then you're able to see, oh, so who is actually running this? Oh, this is a design. Who's running the things? Who's voting? I can look on the news right now and see nothing but doom news, and that is the same as doom scrolling. We're all being fed the same fear-mongering tactics in our media, the shock and awe of desensitization. So when you're scrolling and all you see is bad news, that's doom scrolling. When there's nothing positive, when nobody's doing anything good around you, everything is just all going to shit. Ron DeSantis is just out here burning books and banning the gays and celebrating Confederate History Month, which they are currently doing in Florida.
No.
It's April.
That's a thing?
It's a thing. I'm like, how does one celebrate? Like, gather round the cross burnings on the lawn, children. Bring your hoods. It's a fun time. And I think about all of the children of color who have to sit through that propaganda in school, and it is soul crushing. That to me is an aspect of doom scrolling. Luckily,
when the KKK didn't actually really even exist, that whole thing was a media construct. That there was a movie showing racists running around in
Birth
hoods.
of a Nation, yeah.
And so then they went, oh, we should all make those hoods. I mean,
And then they should do, because media leads, it doesn't follow. And so we're monkey see, monkey do. And, India always said a great thing, which is we can't change our history, but we can change which parts we talk about. Celebrate. Yeah, and that is what's going on, is that this cherry picking to sustain the injustice of the past. I mean, the doom scrolling, I was thinking about how you're doom scrolling, or nowadays the kids with the computer, is that in the 1990s they came up with this revolution in local news. They decided they would start with the police blotter. And that was to scare the population into increasing support for the crime bill, putting more police on the streets, when in fact violence was going down and crime was going down. But with more resources into Tennessee was the first state to have for-profit prisons. Okay, Al Gore's state. Bill Clinton was from Arkansas. For-profit prisons is big money when you're running political campaigns. So, Biden was the one pushing the crime
big
bill.
Money and voting power. I think so many people don't really understand restrictive voting rights, and the fact that if you actually take a population and now ship them to a different prison, those populations still count. So
for voting, for representation. Did you know that? So you
representation.
take everybody out of out of New York City and you put them in Arkansas. Arkansas gets more people in the House of Representatives because they have those prisoners. And those prisoners we're the only country that says a felony, you lose the right to vote. In other countries, people in prison get to vote. Because that's so punitive to take away your right as a citizen to vote. That should not be on the table of your loss of, even if you're a criminal.
It's chattel slavery reform.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
yes,
It's
we know.
people who don't really, you're like, you don't see the difference? No? Like, we stripped the rights. Now wealthy people can buy poor people to increase their representation, increase their votes, without actually having to, get people to support the maniacal thinking that's behind some of the legislation that they're putting forward. It's insane.
Let's look at the rewriting of history and the erasure of the truth. Is in the 2000 election, there's people still saying that the consumer advocate and Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the election. And the truth is that Jeb Bush was head of Texas, and he knocked off anybody who had the same name as a felon off the voter rolls. And they did so in Florida. I mean, he was governor of Florida. Bush was governor of Texas. And they both just knocked off so many minority voters that they won those elections. And yet you talk to a liberal elite, and they'll say, well, Ralph Nader really screwed it over. And the other thing was...
He got like 500 votes more or
Yeah.
something, but they eliminated like 250,000 eligible voters.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
and-
But the narrative has then become, we must have two parties.
But
we
no
must
one wants-
never have a third party.
no
that's
one wants to talk
advocating.
about the suppression of voting.
bipartisan system does not work.
No, it's a winner take
It's
all.
a winner take all, but also if you have such polarized politics, and we have clearly seen this, I would say, especially within the last 2 or 3 elections, of one party gets in, they stack their cabinet, they stack all of their houses, and then they make all of these legislative changes, and then when the next party comes in, okay, now we have to undo all of that. And then the next party comes in, okay, we have to undo all of that. So we're not actually progressing. We are just in a weird cycle of not getting anything done. Big business profits. It's all just a capitalist game. And I really feel like individuals should just be individuals. We don't need the bipartisan system. We are able to communicate so clearly now, and express exactly what our viewpoints are, that we don't need that level of unification in terms of who you align with, as a moral standard as well.
Studies have been showing that our two-party system is not working. The views of the people are not being implemented by voting. Like, voting is not making any legislative difference. We're not getting the programs that the majority of Americans support. We're not getting the outcomes that the majority of Americans support, like free access to abortion. The majority of Americans support that, but then somehow legislatively, we can't vote for it. So there's so many solutions by just looking to other countries, ranked choice voting. There's so many other ways of voting where the will of the people can be felt and have an effect. And it's not our system.
Proportional representation. Yeah, well, one of the things is that, all the commercial media is licensed media. And what licenses mean is that there's standards. And so, and also there's rules and regulations. So, like, why not make it that the local news cannot start with the police blotter, that's illegal, that they have to start with the community bulletin board. So you turn on the news and they say, the group that's planting trees will be meeting at Central Park, blah, 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 and this and this and this, and tell you all the activities that you can get together with the public. And then, like this Rupert Murdoch scandal is that Fox News purposefully lied to their audience because they felt it was more profitable. Rupert Murdoch should lose his license to broadcast. I'm a driver, and if I drive recklessly, I endanger the public. I lose my license. Doesn't matter if I own $1 billion car. I lose my license. I'm a bad driver. He is a bad driver of media. He's proven it, and yet none of the other major medias will come up and promote his loss of license because they know we'd be coming for them. So they have they're in collusion with each other. Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, Tucker Carlson, they all can't talk about media ownership limits. None of them can talk about any media reform. They will be blacklisted. They contracted out of their First Amendment rights when they signed the employment contract to work for a major media company. And so the corporate censorship is so strict. I mean, we know that McCarthyism happened because the media backed it up. The media said, if McCarthy says somebody's bad, we will blacklist them from Hollywood. There was the Hollywood 10. It was all that, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? It was all going after media, and the media heads were on board with McCarthy. So the whole thought that there's a liberal media, it's not true. There is no liberal media. The media is not on us. Yeah. And NPR, and I mean, if you want to go and learn about PBS, go to Bill Moyer's page. I mean, Bill Moyer got kicked off of his own show because the Koch brothers took over PBS, saying that he was PBS and NPR had become too liberal, and now they have to serve their corporate overlords. And so now you're finding that their stories are skewed.
We were on a conference call recently with a bunch of heads of media organizations, and it was fascinating. Ralph Nader was on the call, and
Robert McChesney,
the author of Rich Media, Poor Democracy, which is a fantastic overview of
history.
Of the media. And he was talking about how MSNBC had seen how successful Fox television was by not doing any investigation, by eliminating investigative journalists, and just having the majority of their time filled with opinion pieces. So Fox had just made a fortune that way, and MSNBC had recently fired their investigative journalism department. They were going to just gut all their investigative journalists and go to all opinion talking heads, because that is the cheapest content. It also has the best shock and awe for engaging people. And so that was about 6 months ago. We were told that MSNBC was now going to go to the format of Fox, because in capitalism, that's the most efficient form.
And we just learned that Roger Ailes set up MSNBC before going to Fox. You know, I mean, the incestuousness of it all.
I was just saying, good business is not good information.
Oh yeah, it's the loss of the fairness doctrine. Is that when the radio first came into being, all political parties went, whoa, this is really powerful, and it could be used to destroy other politicians or other political parties. And so they came up with the fairness doctrine, that if you said something negative or untrue about a group, that they would get time on your platform to address your audience in regards to what had been said. And in 1987, the FCC was headed by a Reagan appointee who said that the TV should be regulated the same as an appliance. Like the TV was no different than a toaster. Okay. And so then he said they don't need to do the fairness doctrine, that there doesn't have to be any recourse or any avenue for a person to defend themselves in the media. And Rush Limbaugh considered that to be his day of the Berlin Wall coming down for himself. And so now he could say anything he wanted and know that there would be nobody to rebut. There would be no rebuttal requirement. And then Congress said, hey, we allowed the FCC, because the FCC is a creation of Congress, we allowed them to enforce the rules that the Constitution gave us. And then the FCC, the Congress actually repassed the fairness doctrine, and it got a Reagan veto, and then Bush vetoed it. But when Clinton won in 1992 and took over 93, he had a House and a Senate ruled by Democrats. He did not restore the fairness doctrine. When Obama won, he had a House and a Senate ruled by Democrats. He did not restore the fairness doctrine. Why? Because media is the largest contributor to presidential campaigns. And then they make the most on the election cycle because they charge high fees for airtime. So right now, all of our elected officials know that if they ever speak about media reform, not only will they be blackballed and not covered, but they will also lose the revenue they need to, and then the opinion piece people are all going to come against them. So right now, media is unregulated, unreformable, given all the economic structure that's been built around them. So that's why I say, like for public access, we could put a tax on advertising, a sales tax, when they buy airtime for their advertisements. Think of the Super Bowl. 5%, a 10% sales tax would raise money for community media. And you know what we could do? We could publicly fund presidential elections, because presidential elections are the only ones national in scope. Everyone in the country gets to vote for president. All other elections are regional or statewide, counties, whatever. But the president is national. And if you publicly funded presidential elections with an ad tax, then the person who enters the Oval Office wouldn't be beholden to their corporate sponsors, and they could actually appoint people to all the agencies, the commissions, and all their cabinet secretaries could all be community activists, industry experts, and all these other things, rather than cronies. Because right now, if I gave a certain amount of money to a candidate, I'm saying I want to pick the Secretary of Interior. I want to pick head of the Food and Drug. I want to pick the Securities Exchange Commission. And like I said, is that CEOs have to go to prison so they self-police their organization. And if they don't go to prison, then they don't self-police, and the government doesn't have the resources to police every corporation. But if that CEO is going to go to prison, he's going to find out illegal activity, and he's going to bring them to the government and say, please arrest this guy. I don't want to go to prison. That's the only way it works.
This kind of reminds me of the cartel that offered up the two individuals who was like,
Correct.
We don't vibe with this. This is not how we do business. That was their mistake. They never should have done that. We're reprimanding them. Here you go. Go about your business. So yeah.
I mean, you know, and these are the things that have to happen. I mean, how many CEOs have gone to prison in the last 20 years? And, you know, the media, do you notice how they never tell you history? They never give you a running start and tell you what was learned in the past. The media loves the same scandal over and over, and every time it happens, like the debacle, the subprime debacle. Oh, it was unprecedented. No, it wasn't. We had the savings and loan debacle. It was exactly the same thing. And then they take all these steps that like they didn't even learn from the first time. So, you know, I mean, we have the solution to our problems. And there's forces at work that are preventing it. And the people that are subscribing and supporting those forces don't even realize that they are too.
So what do you feel would be like some immediate solutions for people to see some changes locally as it pertains to media?
Well,
Support cable access.
Yeah.
Support AMP.
and we
Yes.
should have we should be on the radio dial too. And we should have it. Should have a station or a section of this dedicated to local musicians and artisans and performers.
Just support community media in all forms. There's low power FM. There's cable access in many communities, not just Monterey. What do you see, being of the younger generation? What do you see?
Already? What are you doing?
Already. So something that I do, I am 1/3 of a podcast called Lady Blurs Sings the Blues. We are 3+ sized Black women from many different intersecting backgrounds. All three of us have worked in nonprofits, so we're already community based. We talk about what our experiences have been going through healthcare. We've been able to advocate for one another on air, and because we are operating with such a high level of transparency, it really informs people. I've talked about my PCOS. I've talked about how certain organizations will try to play the waiting game if you, for instance, like have messed up dental work, and they keep telling you, oh, we'll see you at this date, and it's 4 or 5 months out, and then you look at their regulations and you realize, oh, okay, well, after 6 months they're no longer liable. This is why they're trying to push out until they say, okay, no, yes, we did mess up, and here's your options moving forward. So it's like, it's really giving people the tools to understand the system that we're in. I was very open and transparent about the process that I went through in buying my home, the processes that I've gone through for gaining financial literacy, going to the bank, telling people about certain events. We have a Big Move Monday section where we talk about other people in our communities who are doing good works. Pop-up culture, I think, is another direct way to bring people together for events, to highlight musicians, to highlight people who are creating, and also farmers markets, really connecting in a grassroots way with your community, trying as best you can to dine farm to table, to find ways to upcycle your materials, to be conscientious about what you buy, why you buy, where you're buying from, really being critical of the influencers that we see who are doing all of these like major fashion hauls, who are doing things to be trendy, and really pointing out how that is detrimental to us in the long run. We do a lot of community outreach. I personally travel up and down California, and I've been blessed with the career that I chose. I am a neuromuscular therapist, a massage therapist. I, originally was wanting to go into the medical field. And when COVID happened, everything shut down. I wanted to be able to continue having that anatomical knowledge and just, not let my expertise and study habits fall to the side. So I was like, let me go ahead and get a certification in a field that I already love. I grew up doing massage. My aunt is a massage therapist. And that was the way that I related to people. And you learn so much through touch about people's emotional states, their physical states, what we are actually putting our bodies through. So, like, I do a lot of corporate gigs, and I just talk to a lot of people about what their lives are like. And I bring that struggle to a platform like this where we can actually all have a dialogue and communicate with one another about the areas in which we are lacking. Because the funny thing about the resources, right? The resources are out there, but you just need the connection. You need that one person who's willing to say, okay, so I have this type of business, you have that type of business, let's get together. You're a graphic artist, I do web design, this person needs a platform, let's make it all happen and connect. And I've been very blessed to be able to marry a lot of my passions and put that into my existence as a way of actually being able to feed myself and my family. So the podcast, just as an area of self-expression, being dedicated to having that space and to building that community, was really the way that I have found to move forward. Because if I did not have the base that I have for my sisterhood, the base that I have for the family that we have cultivated and created, I couldn't imagine trying to surmount some of the challenges that have come my way just in these last few years, between dealing with death in the family, having to navigate probate and law, having the resources to be able to say, hey, I've come across, this glitch and I really need help getting over this particular thing. I need a real estate agent. Does anybody know a real estate agent who will work for someone like me? And I mean, literally, who will advocate, who will go to bat and have the back and forth, because it's a lot of bureaucracy. Who's going to guide you through this? We are never going to be the expert in every single field. We need people. I can say I am very good at, facial recognition. I am very good at processing information and then turning around and maybe repackaging it so that it is more palatable for the everyday consumer. I am very good at looking at a topic, sitting with it, expanding it, bringing it back into focus. These are my strengths. Okay, so what are my weaknesses? It might be like the organizational aspects. I might need help with the more technological knowledge of things. And being supported in my humanity to be able to say that I don't know how to do this, but I know somebody who does. Or if I say I don't know how to do this, somebody will come along and be like, I know how to do that. And then if you have a community, you can be like, do they really know how to do that? Go check out their work. And we have the ability to do that now because we are so connected and tied in. I don't know when LinkedIn became like part of your world. Are you guys on LinkedIn? Are you guys on social medias at all?
Facebook.
Okay, so like how long have you been on Facebook?
Like 14 years?
14 years.
Yes.
So that is 14 years where somebody can go back and say, oh, no, you are living the talk. You're talking and you're walking. And now it's like we are able to do that, where somebody can't really just say, oh, I have this degree. And I can go online and be like, no, you don't. As a massage therapist, even, I was like, I have my certification number, I have my insurance number. You can check me, and you can see that I am who I say I am, which is also another fear of, the social medias where we're creating bots and we have AI technology. There's a lot of fear around people not being real and around scammers. So when you have a platform where you can say, yeah, no, all three of us are very real individuals. We're talking about our real lives. You can go and you can fact check us. You can input information and we'll fact check that information before we put it out. Being able to be accountable for one another is another part of what I do to build community and to keep positive energy and growth within my community. It's how you live your everyday life, even how I managed to connect with you guys. We haven't really talked about that, but I think that would be wonderful. Let's talk about how we met and how this conversation was even facilitated to be brought and distributed through AMP and through radio and through television.
Well, we met you as a healer, and we were working really hard physically, and just, I think our bodies were about to break down, and you came down to the wharf, and you were doing, that was a nonprofit gig, right?
Yeah, I was a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Walk.
Right.
So shout out Philip Geiger for all of his beautiful, wonderful organizational work with the Walk for Alzheimer's, all up and down California, all throughout many, many, many counties, and even national, because I remember doing walks for Alzheimer's in Hawaii, like when I was little. So that organization has been around a really long time. Philip Geiger just happens to be the one who is running it here, and he's local. So thank you for all of his efforts and all of the volunteers who come out and set up and give us the space to operate in. So yeah,
it was a great event. We weren't part of it, but we just begged you for a massage.
I happen to have all my gear.
We were like, oh, look, she has a massage table. Please help us. We're really sore and tired. And I have to say, Kylie, that you're just I have never had a massage that was anything like that. Like, that is just so far and above what my expectation of what a massage could be. It was really amazing.
And we were there because, we worked on the street vending laws. Is that the bootstrap economy is what we call it. Is the American dream was push cart to storefront. And the corporations came in and they took over local government, where city councils are even thinking, like, we don't want street vendors. We want everybody to shop at Walmart. Who pays our bills? Street vendors don't. Because everybody's lost their sense of community. And that's the whole thing, is that one of the reasons the street vending law got passed statewide was it was shown that more women's businesses start off as street vending.
Mm-hmm. It was approached as an anti-discrimination bill, that 70% of street vendors are women who are getting started in small cottage industry. And
that's why people go to foreign countries, is the street vendors give it what I call regional flair. The United States has become a corporate homogenized culture. I mean, you just Target, Walmart, Costco.
Which is a non-culture.
Yeah, which is a non-culture. And so, but
they're so beautiful.
I love a big box prison store, don't you?
Yeah, so my ideas of helping localities are that though anybody who has more than 50 space parking lot has to give up 10% of it to street vendors. So, can you imagine if you go to the Costco parking lot and 10% of it is people who make Christmas ornaments, people who make their own goods, a leather worker, a woodworker. I mean, do you want to have that kind of handmade stuff and the people who do that? Or do you really just want the prison labor in China to make all your stuff? I mean, these are the choices people have to make. And
that's the great thing about street vending, is that literally made in America, is people making their own things, making their own art.
There's also buy sell, but the truth is that give people a chance. I mean, the land of opportunity, it does not exist in empty parking spaces. So let's take parking lots and start to allocate areas and see what flourishes. You know what? You get 3 street vendors, and you know what happens? A musician shows up. And you know what happens when a musician shows up? This kind of like, give a mouse a cookie. Is all of a sudden a clown shows up, and he does a whole performance thing. And then a magician shows up. And all these people have a venue or a platform to show their skills that you're not allowing them to have if you just let corporations own all the property. They're financial collectives. They pool their resources and they can beat all of us, and they can make sure that we don't get together and pool our resources to stand up to them. So, that's...
So shop local.
Yeah,
Shop local. I find beauty in handmade
Yes.
everything. The imperfections is where the soul shines through for me. I truly, truly love supporting people that I know and inspiring people to pursue their passions. Like, yes, for sure, still have your day job to provide for yourself if that's the the point that you're at, but don't let the things that actually keep you alive and thriving just go by the wayside. And find ways to make it work. It is a courageous endeavor to believe in yourself when everybody tells you, the corporate
Right.
America will tell you that you are to be fixed. All of your imperfections.
Corporate mythology.
Corporate mythology is that you are not good enough already. You need XYZ. You can't do it yourself. You need to go get these particular products. And instead of, consuming in a one throwaway type of fashion,
Right.
consume, things that will contribute to growth.
Well, and there's barrier to entry. And that is how they keep their power, is that they, like I said, price competition makes it so everyone goes bankrupt. And so the way that they can keep their prices going is by cheap labor. So they were forced to move production overseas. They weren't forced. It was a choice. So like I come back to the whole idea is one company, one wage. What if right now, corporations only exist as legal entities. They don't exist, that they use the court system for their existence. Why don't we just legislate that they have to pay their top worker and their bottom worker the same? A minute is a minute, an hour is an hour to every human being.
Yeah, all our lives are valuable.
Talk about shake up the corporate culture. Now, that would be devastating. Can you imagine? They'd just be like, what? The CEO doesn't get to walk off with a bonus after he stole everybody's houses? We believe in the intergenerational responsibilities, and that I subscribe to the thought that we are in a position to be the greatest generations in the history of humanity because we have to save humanity from itself. And not to blow ourselves up, not to overpopulate the planet, and not to destroy the environment, all rank in with the initial capture of fire. This is a moment in time. And if we act together and we save humanity's place on this planet and with its natural foundation, then they'll romanticize about us 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, about what it must have been like to live through this great era of change. And we have that chance if we all come together and do this. I talk to a lot of Christians in my booth, and they talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Well, Jesus was there, and he led all these people off to a hill and told them the greatest stuff. It's his best speech. But the miracle was that he put bread and fish in a basket, and there was enough to feed everybody. And the miracle was people were hoarding food under their clothing when they followed him. But some people weren't. And it turned out that his miraculous act of generosity made everyone else give what they had brought. And it turned out there was enough for everyone. And that's what we got. We've passed the threshold of production that we could provide everyone's necessities. I have a saying that once your necessities are met, the rest of life is luxury. And so
Hello, Star Trek?
Yeah. So once we do our necessities, we get luxury. And then that's when we realize that time is all you have to spend. That's why they pay you per hour. Money isn't the common denominator, time is. And so we need more free time. There's a lot of non-material wealth that we can cultivate. Like, let's not have a goods life. Let's learn to live the good life.
Living the good life. So I wonder what your take on is for effort that people are willing to put into something. And should effort be rewarded, or is time truly all equal?
Yeah, no, I believe that in human dignity. I mean, like right now, Aldous Huxley said we got to watch out that corporations and stuff will turn us into a hive. And that in the hive, the planet already has ants and bees. It doesn't need us to be like, oh, we should be like the insects. Let's all like genetically have workers and queens and drones and stuff like that. So we bring something else to the bouquet of life of the planet. And we bring expression and art and beauty and all this stuff. And that's what we have to cultivate. And we could do it. We could provide our necessities with very little effort. And then we could be free to socially interact. And that's why, like, I study old civilizations that gave pedestrian traffic priority and just see all the civic equipment within walking distance of their dormitories, and knowing that it facilitated community interactions so that you develop personal relationships and you were encouraged to be involved in your community. And right now, giving the car the priority is that, you know, the seatbelt and the airbag is like the football helmet. They're lying to you. It's not there to protect you. It's to give you this false sense of security. 40,000 people are dying on the road to our car god. We actually have human sacrifice to the car gods.
Literal human sacrifice, because they're built to fail.
But the money system, again, is, you know, it only works if there's a social goal. So we're all working towards accomplishing something. That's why war is so good for the economy, because we all contribute to the war effort, and then we have something. If there is no goal of the money system, then money becomes an ends in itself. And when it becomes an ends in itself, we all become competitors against each other. So community ties and social ties totally disintegrate if your money system doesn't have a goal. So our money system after World War II was built around the goal of the United States corporate takeover of all the finite resources. And so now we're looking at the new goal is the intergenerational responsibilities, is that we have to pay the environmental bill for the Industrial Revolution. And yeah, you weren't here 100 years ago when they cut down the old growth, but you're here now.
I'm here now.
You're here now,
You're here
and
now.
and we have to pay that price, and that's just
We gotta plant some trees.
I
circumstances
was just going to say,
dictate.
plant the trees.
Plant the trees.
I love as an idea of reform, of actually, because I think a lot of what's lacking also is that unification. You had mentioned, you know, war is so profitable because it makes us all work together. But we have been in war since I have been born, since I've been alive. This is 30 plus years of active wartime. And we are still more separatist and individualistic as ever, because we can all just order our supplies from Amazon to our doorstep. No longer are we relying on our neighbors for victory gardens. I was just also talking about
Right.
victory gardens. And the
James
fact that
Landis.
we are not growing our own food the same way that we were, or we are not banding together to actually strip our resources from our homes to provide for our soldiers overseas. And so we become so disconnected from the fact that we are actually experiencing a time of war. And we are able to live in that cognitive dissonance, which we should not be able to do that. It's not right. And so I think as part of our unification programs, we should have something like JROTC that's mandatory. Every single person has to go work in a state park. Every single person has to maintain a piece of community property.
And how fun is that?
How fun is that?
That will make
So much
variety
fun.
is
So-
the spice.
Well, talk about eliminating mental health issues. I mean, so much of mental health issues is isolation.
If we
So-
literally had restoration groups where we train people on skills, how to build houses, electrical know-how, and if for your volunteer time, which is required, you did a program and you just helped build houses, or you helped clear trash on cleanup days, or you helped babysit at boys and girls centers. If you helped
Yeah.
paint and build and have fun.
If a list of chores just came up and like you
City
said,
chores.
yeah, like that. And
Oh my God! You all have city chores, and you gotta earn
Yeah.
your road rights.
Well, we'll be back.
We'll be back.
We will be back.
We will be back. And
I want to ask Kylie how, because everything that Kylie does is at a level of excellence that I think everybody wants to tune into, as you can tell from today.
Oh.
So, how can people find your podcast?
Ooh, okay. Lady Blurds Sings the Blues is the podcast. You can find myself, sometimes V, who is a jazz trombonist, and Prowess the Testament, who is an amazing, dope MC based out of New York City. You can find us bantering live on Twitch. We stream every Sunday, and we do that under Veronica's page. So that's sometimes _ V on Twitch. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Pods, YouTube, SoundCloud under Lady Blurds Sings the Blues. If you would like to find me on social media, I am Kylie Too Smart everywhere. That's TOOSMART. That's too smart for my own good. Yes, we know. So if you would like to link up with me, I am always willing to have the conversation. I love just interacting and finding people and knowing what you guys are doing for your personal solutions. How are you overcoming? That's a very like video game mindset of like the challenge. Like you go out and you're hungry to defeat it. So yes, that is where you can find me on all my socials. It's Kylie Too Smart everywhere. Lady Blurds Sings the Blues.
Awesome.
all right, and you can find us at the tie-dye booth down at the wharf on the weekends.
Every weekend.
On the
Every
weekends.
weekend. So camouflage.
Yeah.
And I think that's near a wrap.
Should we tell them where to find AMP? If you guys would also like to contribute to this communal input and positivity, if you guys have a project that you just feel passionate about, if you have a business that you want to talk about, or if you are just someone who is also traveling out in the world and would like to bring some of your knowledge and expertise to a space, you can find AMP
On Tyler Street.
on Tyler Street, right across from the transit station and a bunch of historical buildings. So do yourself a flavor and come by, tune in, and contribute.
Okay. I'm Indy Weeks.
I'm James Burns.
I'm Kylie Too Smart.
All right.
Who cares if you're hyper? Who cares if you're shy? In the end, we all share the same sky. Who cares what your color? White, black, brown, or blue? If we all help each other, we'll know what to do. Live life as you want it, accomplish who you want to be. If we all come together, I'm sure we'll all agree. Everyone can get along, everyone can sing a song, everyone can make someone feel better. There is no time to wait to get rid of this meaningless hate. Today could be the start. Who cares what's your gender? Who cares what's your race? In the end, everyone has the same face. Who cares what's your religion? Separates us how? In the end, we're all living in the now. Everyone can get along. Everyone can sing a song. Everyone can make someone feel better. There is no time to wait to get rid of this meaningless hate. Today could be the start.